Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time when affordable housing meant paying a penny to sleep tied upright over a hemp rope in a dingy candlelit room full of snoring strangers. Yes, that was the budget option, because if you had nothing, and I mean nothing to your name, you still might be able to afford a few hours of slumped over half-conscious rest on what was literally a human clothesline. Sounds cozy, right? No pillows, no blankets, no real privacy. Just you, a dozen other exhausted souls, and a rope stretched from wall to wall for you to hang over like an unwashed coat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and what time it is in the comments. I'm always curious who's tuning in from where, and whether this is your bedtime story or your 3 a.m. spiral into Victorian nightmares. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture it. East London, sometime in the 1870s. You're cold. You haven't eaten a proper meal in days. Your boots are falling apart and your fingers are numb, but tonight, you've scraped together a single penny. That's enough to buy you the infamous rope sleep at one of the city's cheaper lodging houses. You step inside, blinking at the lantern light, and the smell hits you first. It's something between wet wool, pipe smoke, body odour, and an underlying tang of old sickness. You see the rope sagging slightly under the weight of early arrivals already dozing against it, their chins tucked to their chests, arms hanging limp. It runs across the room at chest height and connects to heavy iron rings on either wall. The keeper, usually a gruff tobacco-spitting man who does not care if you live or die, waves you in. You pay up. No receipt, no refund, no mercy. And that's your bed for the night. You lean against the rope, maybe cross your arms over it for a little support, and just try to drift off. You won't sleep deeply. No one ever does. Every cough or shuffle jerks you back to the half-light. But it's better than the street, isn't it? At least you won't freeze. Well, probably. The rope isn't even yours for the whole night. At sunrise, or earlier if the keeper feels like it, someone comes around and literally unties one end of the rope. It falls. Everyone flops to the floor like a string of puppets cut loose. Time to go. The rope's getting reset for the next batch of desperate souls. If you linger too long, you're liable to get kicked in the ribs or have cold water splashed on you. It's a brutal kind of hospitality, but again, it's better than nothing. Barely. Now, if you had 2 pence to your name, luxury. That got you a penny sit-up bed, a narrow wooden bench, no rope, but you still couldn't lie down. And if, by some miracle, you had 4 whole pennies jingling in your pocket, you might get a cubicle with a mattress. Thin, straw-stuffed sack, stained and damp, but it was horizontal. Imagine the bliss. Real sleep, in a real bed, with real bedbugs. The rope bed may sound like a myth, or some cruel Victorian joke, but it's well documented. These lodging houses, sometimes called doss houses, offered tiered options depending on what you could afford, and rope sleeping was a real grim part of the menu. It spoke volumes about the working poor, the underpaid labourers, and those who fell between the cracks of rapid industrialisation. And here's your quirky fringe fact for the night. Not only did people accept the rope sleep, but some even preferred it to the bed because it made it easier to wake up for early factory shifts. You didn't get cosy. You didn't oversleep. You were ready to stumble back into the fog by dawn. Of course, historians still debate the full extent of rope sleeping, how widespread it was, whether it was a regular nightly service or more of an urban legend exaggerated by journalists of the time. Some argue the rope bed has become symbolic, a shorthand for Victorian cruelty and poverty, rather than something that existed in every poorhouse. But multiple period accounts describe the setup in detail, including drawings and first-hand testimonies. The consistency is hard to ignore, even if the exact scale is up for grabs. You might be asking, why didn't the government do anything about this? Good question. Victorian England wasn't exactly known for its warm social policies. If you were poor, it was assumed you'd probably done something wrong. Moral failure, laziness, sin. Those were the usual suspects. It took decades before real reforms began to reshape housing, wages, and labour protections. Until then, you made do with what you could, even if it meant paying a penny to spend the night tied upright like a sad marionette in a room full of coughing strangers. And here's the part that's worth sleeping on, if you can. These rope beds didn't just disappear. Versions of them popped up later in New York, Dublin, and other urban centres facing mass homelessness. Even into the early 20th century, penny lodging houses offered versions of the rope sleep. proving once again that if there's a way to monetize desperation, someone will do it. The rope sleepers lived in the cracks, beneath history's polished surfaces and grand parlour rooms. You won't find them in the pages of Dickens, at least not by name, but they were out there, heads nodding against a sagging rope, dreaming of heat, a mattress, maybe a door that locked. They remind us just how low the bar once was for basic rest, and how many people still live without it. The first thing that hits you when you step out of that rope-sleeping lodging house into the early morning air isn't actually fresh air. It's something much heavier, almost chewy. You walk straight into the infamous London fog, thick as pea soup and twice as green. It curls around your ankles and shoulders like a damp, unwanted scarf. But this isn't just your average mist. Oh no, this is industrial fog. Smog, really. A filthy blend of natural fog and coal smoke belched out from thousands of chimneys and factories across the city. It's the kind of air that sticks in your lungs, turns your handkerchief black, and leaves a faint taste of iron and ash on your tongue. You cough into your sleeve and keep walking. If you look up, the sun's just a sickly smear behind the grey, and every lamppost along the street is haloed in yellow, flickering gloom. Horses clip-clop past you, their flanks already streaked with grime. The driver shouts something about keeping clear of the curb, because the gutters are overflowing with more than just rain. Animal waste, rotting food, spilled gin, and something you really don't want to investigate too closely are all mixing in the shallow rivulets racing toward the sewer drains. And beneath that street, oh boy, it gets even worse. But we'll get to that soon enough. This is London in the mid to late 1800s. The glittering capital of an empire, yes, but also one of the filthiest, most congested urban nightmares on earth. For every elegant townhouse with white columns and flower boxes, there's a slum alley nearby with no windows, no drainage, and no real chance of escape. You, in this moment, are somewhere in between. Too poor to live well, too stubborn to go quietly. Like so many others, you're trying to make your way through the soot and struggle. Victorian London was powered by coal. Mountains of the stuff were burned every day to keep homes warm, light lamps, and run factories that clanked and groaned from dawn till dusk. The sky was never really blue. Chimneys coughed up endless plumes of black smoke, and it all settled into the fog that became a defining feature of the era. People gave it nicknames: London Ivy, the London Particular, the Big Smoke. It was both a punchline and a death sentence. You head toward the factory district where the smog hangs especially low. The smell here is more chemical, acrid and biting. Paints, dyes, tanneries, soap boilers, they all release their own special flavour into the already unbreathable mix. And the sound. There's always sound. Horse hooves, steam whistles, shouting, hammering, coughing, constant noise, nothing gentle. Here's a strange little fact to add to your mental scrapbook. Some Victorians believed the fog was actually good for their health. No joke. There were people who swore that the London air toughened the constitution, built up your lungs, made you more resilient. It's the same logic that thinks a cold plunge will cure your taxes. Doctors, too, were divided. Some thought fog caused nervous breakdowns. Others thought it simply cleared the air of spiritual miasmas. Science was still sorting itself out. Meanwhile, your boots squelch in something unspeakable. You keep your eyes forward. Around you, other workers move like shadows, hunched, coughing, moving fast to beat the factory bell. They're not talking, they're conserving breath. You pass a woman selling roasted chestnuts from a little coal stove cart, her face streaked with soot. She doesn't look up. She knows this fog won't lift for hours. Some days it doesn't lift at all. And when it gets bad, really bad, people die. Literally. There were weeks where the air got so toxic that the death toll spiked across the city. Children especially suffered. Chest infections, croup, bronchitis. Doctors would shake their heads and say it was the damp, but it wasn't. It was poison in slow motion. Which brings us to one of the great debates of the Victorian era. How much responsibility did the government actually bear for this choking, gasping mess? Should the coal industry be regulated? Should there be citywide efforts to clean the air, improve heating technology, or limit emissions from certain factories? The answers back then usually boiled down to, sounds expensive. Profit came first, air came second, and lungs, disposable. And yet, for all its foulness, there's something strangely atmospheric about it, isn't there? You turn a corner and see a figure vanish into the fog, maybe a newsboy, maybe something else. Lantern light dances on the cobblestones. There's a kind of grim beauty in the way the city disappears and reappears in layers. Buildings loom suddenly, like ghosts. Time slows. Sounds warp. You get why writers like Dickens and artists like Whistler made fog a centrepiece of their work. It turns the city into a mystery, into a mood. But there's no romance in breathing it. You reach your work site where blackened bricks form the walls of a textile mill. The other workers are already filing in. You line up, eyes stinging, lungs aching, stomach still empty. One more day. The foreman shouts your name. You don't answer fast enough. He glares. You step inside. The air in the mill isn't much better than outside, just warmer and dustier. Cotton fibres float through the air like snow. If you're here long enough, they'll start to clog your lungs too. Byssinosis, they'll call it. Brown lung, another gift from the age of industrial glory. Outside, the fog continues to choke the city, wrapping it in a blanket that neither warms nor comforts. For some, it hides sins. For others, it reveals the rot beneath the surface. But for you, trudging through it day after day, it's just one more thing to survive. You make it through another shift, ears still ringing from the clatter of machinery, fingers stiff from repetitive strain, and eyes itchy from the cotton dust. When you step out of the mill, the fog is finally starting to lift. It's like the city has exhaled, though what it's breathing out still smells like coal tar and regret. You blend back into the crowd of tired bodies heading in all directions, shoulders slumped, mouths closed. There's a quiet understanding between everyone here. Don't draw attention to yourself. Don't linger too long in one place, and don't ever end up in a workhouse. Anything but that. Now, if the rope sleep was rock bottom, the workhouse was the bedrock beneath it. You walk past one on your way home, if you can call the alley you sleep in a home, and its presence casts a long, ugly shadow. The gates are tall and foreboding, made of iron and judgment. The building is grey, squatting on its plot like a beast that swallows the poor and spits out silence. Windows are narrow, placed just high enough to prevent you from seeing inside, but not so high that you forget they're watching. Workhouses were meant to be a last resort, but they were also a warning, a structure built as much for moral discipline as for shelter. Go in, and you give up everything. Your clothes, your belongings, your name, even your family. Married couples were separated, children placed in different wards, men assigned to stone breaking or oakum picking, women scrubbed floors or washed linens until their skin cracked. Meals were deliberately joyless. Boiled potatoes, watery gruel, dry bread. Enough to keep you alive, but not enough to make you want to stay. That was the idea. Poverty, according to the architects of the workhouse system, wasn't just a problem. It was a personal failing, and punishment thinly disguised as help was how you fixed it. You shudder at the thought. There's a kid about your age begging near the workhouse gate, holding out a grimy tin cup and saying he's hungry. You know better than to stop. The beadle, the man with the top hat and the smug expression of someone with a steady paycheck, already has his eye on him. He doesn't shout, not yet, he just waits, arms folded until the boy makes a choice. Move on, or be moved. You turn away. Workhouses weren't new to the Victorian era, but the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act gave them teeth. The law was crafted with cold precision, designed to reduce the cost of looking after the poor by making the experience as miserable as legally possible. If you needed help, you had to earn it by suffering for it. The goal wasn't to care for people, it was to make them not want to be cared for. And yet, despite everything, the workhouse was sometimes the only option left. For orphans, for the elderly, for the disabled or chronically ill, it was the last stop on a long and degrading road. Death rates were high, disease was constant. Abuse, verbal, physical, institutional, was barely concealed. Inspectors came and went, but their reports often focused more on budgets and soup quantities than actual conditions. It was all too easy to become invisible inside those walls. Here's a grimly fascinating fact. The workhouse uniform was deliberately ugly. Coarse wool, dull grey or brown, shapeless and humiliating. It was meant to strip away identity, pride, and any lingering notion of self-worth. You weren't a person anymore. You were a case number, a burden to be managed. Some Victorians believed in the system. They argued that workhouses prevented fraud and laziness, but others, social reformers, writers, even some clergy, fought back. Charles Dickens, for instance, wove biting critiques into his novels. Oliver Twist was a slap in the face to anyone who thought institutional charity was working. Others wrote pamphlets, gave speeches, tried to stir public outrage. But change came slowly. It always does when the people suffering aren't the ones making the rules. You walk on, past the looming building and the children huddled near the fence. Someone whistles, someone else spits. A carriage rumbles past, its occupant hidden behind silk curtains, utterly untouched by the cold reality just inches from the wheel. There's always someone richer in a hurry to look away. What people often miss about the workhouse system is how much of it was performative. The strict rules, the cruel routines, the awful food, they weren't just practicalities, they were messages, warnings. They said, don't be poor, don't get sick, don't lose your job, don't age, and if you do, keep your shame to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, if you suffer enough, someone might let you live another week. But here's where history gets a little murky. Some scholars argue that not all workhouses were hellholes. Some had competent wardens, some were relatively clean, some even tried to provide education or vocational training. These were exceptions, not the rule, but they raise a valid point. How much of what we remember about the workhouses is truth, and how much is Dickensian exaggeration? It's a debate that still divides historians, especially those combing through old reports and first-hand testimonies that vary wildly from place to place. Either way, the threat was real enough that you'll do anything to avoid ending up behind those gates. You've seen what happens to people who go in, how they come out, if they ever do. The way their eyes look afterward, emptied, like a candle burned all the way down to the wick. So you keep walking past the workhouse, past the smoky chimneys, past the kid with the cup, and into the alley you sometimes share with 3 other men. One's already asleep, wrapped in a coat that doesn't quite close. You curl up in your corner, stomach growling, fingers tucked into your sleeves, and pray you don't wake up to rain. Or worse, the beetles boot in your ribs. You wake with a sore neck, a sore back, and that damp feeling that tells you it either rained during the night, or the alley just wept quietly into your clothes. Morning light, pale and grudging, slips between the buildings above. Somewhere nearby, a cart rattles over cobblestones. The man next to you groans in his sleep. You stretch, wince, and try to remember the last time your teeth didn't feel like they were furred in coal dust and sadness, and that thought strangely reminds you it's time to clean up, or at least give your mouth a good scraping. Now, hygiene in Victorian London is less of a daily habit and more of a tactical decision. You don't brush your teeth so much as negotiate with them. If you can scrounge up a scrap of cloth and some soot, you've got yourself a makeshift toothbrush and toothpaste in one. Just dip the rag in some fireplace ash, rub it around your gums and spit into the gutter. Minty fresh? Not exactly. But that gritty scrape does make you feel marginally less decomposed. That's right, soot. Or, if you're slightly more fortunate, maybe powdered charcoal. Sometimes even crushed brick. Victorians had all kinds of ideas about how to keep their teeth clean, and many of them were about as effective as cleaning a window with sandpaper. Dental hygiene wasn't standardised yet, and toothbrushes were often homemade or shared within a family. Bristles were usually coarse boar hair nailed into a bone handle. If you lost a bristle mid-scrub, well, just consider it extra fibre. And what about toothpaste? Glad you asked. Recipes varied wildly. Some involved baking soda mixed with salt. Others used chalk or even powdered cuttlefish bone. One popular commercial paste included honey and ground charcoal, which must have made you look like you'd been gnawing on burnt toast. And then there were those terrifying soul brave enough to swish with vinegar or ammonia, convinced it would whiten their teeth. Spoiler, it didn't. The wealthier classes, of course, had access to slightly more refined options. You pass a chemist's shop with little blue apothecary bottles in the window, each promising to clean your teeth, cure bad breath, and possibly fix your love life. But even the rich weren't immune to terrible dental decisions. In fact, there's your quirky fact for today. Some Victorian women would have their teeth pulled on purpose in their 20s, just so they could be fitted with a full set of fashionable dentures, made of porcelain, ivory, or even, brace yourself, dead people's teeth. No, that's not a horror story. It was real. These were known as Waterloo teeth, because many were harvested from soldiers killed in battle. Imagine dying in a muddy field only to have your incisors end up smiling on some dowager in Mayfair. In fairness, some of the teeth came from poor people who sold them while still alive. Desperation finds creative outlets. But the next time you see a Victorian portrait of someone with a pristine white grin, just know that grin may have had multiple previous owners. You do your best with what you've got. Ash, maybe a splash of water, a few careful swipes. It doesn't help much, but it's something. Then you stand up, stretch again, and take a look at your hands. Your fingernails are dark with grime. There's a cut on your knuckle that hasn't quite healed. It might be time to do something about the rest of your body. Public baths do exist, but they cost money. The better ones are more like social clubs, separated by class, of course, and the water's only as clean as the last guy who used it. Many people bathe once a week, some less. In the poorer districts, it's not uncommon to wash in a basin, or even take a bar of soap to the Thames and hope the tide isn't too cruel that day. You wander past a public pump and join a small line of women filling tin pails and kettles. One of them glares at you until you move on. Hygiene is gendered too here. Women are expected to keep themselves tidy. Lavender water, rose soap, hair brushed nightly. Men, as long as you don't smell like a corpse, you're considered presentable. Mostly. Then there's your clothes. You're wearing the same pair of trousers you've had for over a year. The seams are going, the knees are thin, and one cuff is permanently damp. Your shirt, stiff with yesterday's sweat, is due for a wash, but that might not happen this week. Maybe you'll swap with someone for a cleaner one, or trade labour at a wash house. Or maybe you'll just air it out and pretend it smells like lavender. That's a fun game. And let's not forget about hair. Barbers offer a shave and trim for a penny or two, but you can also do it yourself with a cracked mirror and a dull blade if you're feeling brave. Lice? Yeah, they're part of the package. You try not to think about them. There are lice powders made from mercury compounds, but you're not exactly lining up to pour that into your scalp. Here's a point of contention among historians, by the way. Were Victorians truly dirty, or just operating by a different standard? Some researchers argue that people did value cleanliness. They just had fewer tools and less reliable access to water. Others point to letters and diaries where people complained about how awful everyone smelled, even by the standards of the day. So maybe it's both. People cared about hygiene but still walked around like human petri dishes. Honestly, sounds about right. As the morning wears on, you pass a butcher swatting flies off a hanging carcass and a baker fanning smoke from his open oven. The mingling smells are equal parts delicious and revolting. The streets are starting to buzz now. Women are shopping with their baskets, kids are chasing each other, and the man selling cure-all elixirs is back on his soapbox, promising stronger teeth, clearer skin, and eternal vigour, for the low, low price of half a shilling. You keep walking, head down, wondering if today will be the day you can afford soap, or a proper toothbrush, or, who knows, maybe you'll find a few real teeth on the ground and start your own denture business. The bar's not that high after all. You grin at the thought, feeling the grit on your tongue, and head into the crowd. You know the stench before you see it. Before your boots even turn the corner toward the embankment, the air gets thicker, wetter, and somehow more aggressive. It's the kind of smell that feels like it has mass, like it could knock you back if you breathed in too fast. You don't breathe in fast. In fact, you start mouth breathing, which isn't much better because now you can taste it. Rotten eggs, sewage, something vaguely metallic, and a sweetness that has no business being sweet. This is not just the usual London filth. This is something far worse. You've arrived at the Thames. The year is 1858, and the river has officially declared war on your nose. It's the middle of what history will later call the Great Stink, but for you, it's just another Thursday. The river looks like someone melted down despair and poured it through the city's veins. Gone is any hint of blue or shimmer. Now it's a sluggish, brown-green soup, crusted with oily patches and debris bobbing like sick dreams. You see the usuals: dead rats, empty bottles, unidentifiable clumps of fur, and something that might have been a hat or might have been alive once. Either way, you're not touching it. People are gagging, carriages are rerouting, even Parliament, tucked up in its fine Gothic palace, is losing its collective mind because the stink is seeping through the curtains. They've tried everything. Soaking the drapes in lime chloride, dousing corridors with vinegar, even stuffing handkerchiefs with herbs and holding them under their noses like some kind of olfactory shield. Nothing works. Because this isn't just a smell. This is a historical event happening right up your nostrils, so how did it come to this? Well, let's rewind a bit. London's population has exploded in recent decades. More people, more waste, and absolutely no plan to deal with it. The city's medieval sewers are more like open drains. In many neighbourhoods, people still toss their chamber pots directly into the gutters, and the waste makes its way slowly and gloriously into the river. Add to that all the factory runoff, slaughterhouse blood, and the overflow from grave sites, and you've got yourself a potion worthy of Satan's punch bowl. But wait, it gets better. Because not too long ago, someone had the brilliant idea to connect thousands of homes and businesses directly to these storm drains with newfangled flushing toilets. That means, instead of just rainwater going into the Thames, it's now everything. Human waste, industrial filth, and whatever you flushed after a dodgy fish dinner. Efficiency, Victorian style. And what did the summer of 1858 bring? A heat wave. Weeks of scorching temperatures that baked the river's contents until the smell became legendary. People were reportedly vomiting in the streets. Families fled the city if they could. Priests held their noses while giving sermons. There are accounts of lawyers passing out mid-trial because of the stink wafting in through open windows. It was, quite literally, unbearable. Here's your historical fact for this section. The Great Stink was so bad that it actually moved Parliament. Not philosophically, physically. For the first time in, well, ever, politicians from both sides of the aisle agreed that something had to be done, and fast. Cue the entrance of Joseph Basil Gett, a name that sounds made up but is very real and very important. He's the civil engineer tasked with saving London's collective respiratory system. And to do that, he starts building a new modern sewer system, a marvel of the era that, incredibly, still functions in many parts today. But that's later. For now, the stink reigns. You watch as a barge heaves past, leaving a wake that churns up a rainbow sheen of something unnatural. A vendor nearby tries to keep selling meat pies, but even he looks like he's questioning his life choices, and you, ever the curious observer, wander a bit too close to the embankment and nearly gag. It's not just the smell, it's the feel of it. The air has a texture, like damp wool soaked in swamp water. Strangely, some people still insist that the Thames is the lifeblood of the city. You hear a man say it, straight-faced while holding a kerchief to his mouth. It's a poetic idea. But when the lifeblood of your city smells like expired soup made from regret and decomposition, maybe it's time to reconsider your metaphors. And here's your fringe fact. Some Victorians believed that the smell itself, what they called miasma, was the root cause of disease. Not the germs in the water, not the bacteria, not the fact that people were drinking straight from the filth. Just the smell. The stench was evil, tangible, dangerous. And while they weren't entirely wrong that bad air was unhealthy, they didn't yet understand why. Germ theory hadn't fully taken hold, so doctors and city planners thought if they got rid of the odour, they'd get rid of cholera. Spoiler, they didn't. Cholera doesn't care how nice something smells, it just wants a drink. Preferably from your shared neighbourhood water pump that's been quietly receiving donations from nearby cesspits. You step back from the river, breathing shallowly, and glance up toward the Houses of Parliament. It's strange to think that the stench is uniting the city. Peasants and politicians alike clutching their noses, demanding a fix. For once, misery has levelled the playing field. There's something poetic in that, you suppose. But as you walk away, the smell follows. It clings to your clothes, seeps into your hair, and settles in the back of your throat like a bad memory. You wonder how long it will take before the river becomes livable again. Before people stop dying from what they can't see, and stop blaming the air instead of the water. You wonder if they ever will. And then you pass a water seller with a barrel on wheels, shouting that his product is fresh and safe. You don't ask where he got it. You already know. You keep walking, turning your back on the river as if that'll help scrub the stench from your brain. It doesn't. The stink stays with you, like a bad dream or a guilty memory. But at least the streets are louder here, a little more alive, and that helps distract you. You pass vendors shouting over one another, a barrel organ wheezing out a tune you almost recognise, and the clatter of hooves as a hansom cab weaves recklessly through the crowd. The energy of the city is picking up, but beneath it all there's something else humming through the cobblestones tonight. A nervousness, a hush underneath the noise. You can feel it in the way people look over their shoulders, the way conversations dip when a policeman walks past. Something's off. You follow the current of the crowd into Whitechapel, one of the grimmer corners of the city, even by Victorian standards. It's all narrow lanes and crooked buildings leaning over you like gossiping old crones. Laundry flaps between tenements. The air smells like coal smoke, sweat and something metallic. And everyone here walks a little faster after dark. Because lately there's been something out there. Something cutting through the fog with a blade and leaving behind nothing but blood, panic and headlines. The East End has always been rough, but now it's afraid. Women are sticking to main roads. Men keep their hands in their pockets, clutching whatever they think might pass for a weapon. The word Ripper hangs over the neighbourhood like a grim halo. Yes, it's that moment in history, the one that will echo through true crime podcasts and conspiracy theories for centuries to come. Jack the Ripper is stalking the alleys, slicing open the shadows and turning desperation into spectacle. And you, unlucky you, are living right in the middle of it. What's particularly twisted is how fast the horror has become a kind of tourism. Within days of the first murder, people from the more respectable districts start coming to Whitechapel just to gawk. They hire guides, some of whom are barely sober, who lead them past the murder scenes like it's a haunted walking tour. You see one of them now, a man with a bowler hat and a walking stick pointing dramatically at a blood-stained wall. His audience gasps and clutches their parasols. A lady faints. It's theatre. You don't get the luxury of fainting, you've walked those alleys, you've slept near them, and you've seen the way the fear lingers, thick as the fog, long after the body's been taken away. The police? Overwhelmed. Out of their depth. You watch two bobbies chatting on a corner, looking tired and not particularly hopeful. They've questioned every butcher, doctor, lunatic and locksmith within a mile, and they're still no closer to catching whoever's behind the murders. Newspapers fan the flames, publishing lurid illustrations and speculative letters, some of them probably fakes written just to sell more copies. From hell, one of them read, like the killer was writing fan mail to the city. Here's your historical fact for this one. Jack the Ripper wasn't just the first modern serial killer, he was the first celebrity killer. The case marked a turning point in how crime was reported, how fear was sold and how the public consumed tragedy. The Victorian press milked it for all it was worth, inventing phrases like leather apron and Whitechapel fiend, turning real women's deaths into serialised horror stories. In some ways, the Ripper was as much a creation of the media as he was a creature of the alleyways. And here's your creepy fringe fact. Some people bought pieces of clothing supposedly stained with the Ripper's victims' blood, or they'd collect pebbles from the murder sites, like morbid little souvenirs. One guy even claimed he'd seen the Ripper's face in the smoke above his tea kettle, and tried to charge admission to look at it. If there's a way to monetize misery, someone in Victorian London will find it. It's basically a law of nature. As for who the Ripper really was, that's where the scholars and the amateurs and the YouTubers all get tangled up. The theories are endless. A deranged doctor, a butcher with a secret, a royal scandal, a Freemason cover-up, an American quack. There's even one theory that he was a woman, Jill the Ripper. Some insist he had surgical skill. Others think that's nonsense and say he just had luck and a fast pair of feet. The truth is, no one knows, and that's what keeps the myth alive. The not knowing. The horror without a face. You glance down an alley you used to cut through at night, and now you don't dare. You think of Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly, the so-called canonical five. Each of them poor, each of them vulnerable, each of them killed so brutally that even the hardened East End winced. The press called them prostitutes, but that was only part of the truth. Most were working-class women trying to survive, sleeping rough when they had no money for lodging, taking jobs where they could. You feel the weight of that. You live in the same world they did, different streets, same game, and here's the awful thing. Even now, their names are often forgotten, overshadowed by his. The faceless man in the black coat, the myth, the monster. But the women, the real women, they fade. They become footnotes in someone else's horror story. So you walk a little faster, hands in your coat, eyes sharp. Every stranger looks suspicious. Every shadow twitches. Somewhere, a drunk yells something unintelligible. Somewhere else, a scream rings out. But it's probably just a fight over gin or a runaway cart. Probably. You duck into a narrow lane that cuts behind a butcher's shop. The stink of blood is strong, but you're used to that. You've got places to be, and fear doesn't pay your rent. Not that you have rent, but you get the idea. You keep moving. That's what you do here. You don't stop. Not in Whitechapel. Not tonight. Because the Ripper may be long gone by morning, or he might not be. and the city never really cared, not enough to keep the poor safe, not enough to stop turning tragedy into cheap entertainment. You turn the corner, and the fog swallows you whole. You're not even halfway down the street before you feel it. That itch between your shoulder blades, the prickle at the base of your neck. Like you're being watched. You pick up your pace. Not because you're afraid, okay, maybe a little, but because you've heard the stories. Everyone has. Stories of people who walked alone and didn't come back, not because of some knife-wielding phantom in the fog this time, but because of another Victorian nightmare. One that doesn't hide in shadows, it hides in graves. You duck into a narrower alley hoping to take a shortcut and shake the feeling. Cobblestones are slick with rain, and the gaslights flicker overhead like they're unsure whether to keep burning. As you pass a crumbling brick wall, you glance over your shoulder. Nothing. Still, your skin crawls. It's not paranoia when you live in a time where the dead can't even rest properly. Because if you die poor in this city, and let's be honest, the odds aren't exactly in your favour, you don't get a headstone or a coffin of your own. You get a communal grave, hastily dug and covered just enough to pass for decent. That is, until someone comes along with a shovel and a paycheck. That's right. Resurrection men. Body snatchers. Grave robbers with an eye for anatomy and a complete lack of scruples. You die, and the next night someone might dig you up, throw your body in a sack and sell it to a medical school for a handful of guineas. That's not an urban legend. That's Tuesday. You pass the edge of a churchyard now, and you don't even look in. The fence is too low, the grave's too shallow, the soil too freshly turned. It doesn't help that medical students often don't ask too many questions when a corpse arrives slightly dirtier than expected. They're not buying a story, they're buying anatomy. And the resurrection men know that. Some of them work in pairs, others have full-on networks, lookouts, diggers, sellers, even bribed officials to look the other way. The real money is in fresh corpses. Fresher the better. There's even a sick little code word for it. The greengrocer's special. 1 step above soil and still warm. And if you think they're just snatching the unclaimed bodies, think again. Some were claimed, some were mourned, and some were definitely killed just to be sold, though that gets a little harder to prove. Here's your historical fact. The most infamous case of murder for anatomy wasn't in London, but in Edinburgh. Burke and Hare, in 1828. They realised grave robbing was messy and time-consuming, so they skipped the digging part and just started murdering people. Delivered the bodies straight to a medical professor, no questions asked. When they were caught, Hare turned on Burke, who was hanged and publicly dissected as poetic justice. His skeleton, still on display. That's Victorian morality for you. But even after laws were passed to make it easier for medical schools to get unclaimed bodies legally, the demand still outpaced supply. And where there's demand, someone will crawl through a graveyard at midnight with a spade and a lantern. Some were just opportunists. Others had it down to a science, literally. There were techniques for exhuming a body without disturbing the grave too much. Rope systems, boards to dampen footfall, tricks for resealing the soil. If someone tells you grave robbing isn't a skill, they've never seen a professional at work. And here's a morbid fringe detail to add to your evening. Some resurrection men work double duty as undertakers. Bury you one day, dig you up the next. Efficient, profitable, disgusting. But no one in power really did much about it. After all, the victims were poor. Who was going to complain? There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how widespread body snatching was by the late 1800s. Some historians argue that by this point, new laws and shifting medical ethics had made it rare. Others point out that the black market for cadavers never fully disappeared. It just got better at hiding. Like everything else in Victorian London, the truth is probably somewhere under a few layers of soot and denial. You finally emerge from the alley into a slightly busier street, but the feeling doesn't go away. Not entirely. You glance at a man digging near the edge of a cemetery, and for a split second you wonder, groundskeeper or grave thief? Hard to say. You pass without making eye contact. And here's the worst part. People knew. Everyone knew. You heard the stories growing up. If you had a family member buried recently, someone had to sit at the grave overnight, sometimes for a week, just to make sure they stayed there. Families would pool together to afford a mort safe, an iron cage fitted over the grave. Some would leave sharp stones or nails in the coffin to catch thieves red-handed, literally. But most people? Most just hoped their loved one wasn't worth enough on the black market to be worth the trouble. The poor couldn't afford dignity in life. Why should death be any different? You remember a girl, maybe 13, whose mother died suddenly. No money for a proper burial, just a pine box and a hole in the ground. She and her brother camped beside the grave for 3 nights, taking shifts. Someone said they were brave, someone else said it was a waste of time. A week later, no one could remember the woman's name. You shake off the memory and keep moving. The street is full of ghosts now. Imagined or real, it's hard to tell. You wonder if you'll end up in some anatomy lab one day, spread out on a table while a student pokes your liver and makes jokes about your boots. You'd like to think you'd haunt the place, knock over some beakers, whisper rude things in Latin. But haunting takes energy, and you're not sure you'll have much left. So you walk faster, eyes on the horizon, past the churchyards, past the hospitals, past the flickering gas lights and quiet corners. You don't plan on dying tonight, but then again, who does? And if you do, well, maybe find yourself a mortsafe. You make it to the main road just as the lamps are being lit, long poles reaching up to coax fire into iron cages above the street. It gives everything a flickering, unreal glow, like the world is half remembered and still deciding whether to wake up or fall asleep. Your eyes sting, partly from the smoke and partly because you've barely slept. But you keep moving. No destination exactly, just forward. That's the trick to surviving here. Don't pause, don't look back, and definitely don't stop long enough to start reading the wallpaper. Because if you do, you might notice something odd. No, not odd. Gorgeous. A particular shade of green, rich, velvety, almost hypnotic. You see it in parlors, on curtains, in fashion plates. It's called Shields green, or sometimes Paris green, and it's the colour of the moment. The wealthier neighbourhoods are dripping in it. Wallpaper in that shade sells like warm gin on a cold night. Designers rave about it. It's fashionable, modern, even a little decadent. And, oh yes, it's also full of arsenic, and that's right. The colour of envy is also the colour of early death. You pass a shop that specialises in wallpapers. The front window displays elegant floral prints, paisleys, stripes, all variations on that same lush green. It's so pretty it makes your molars ache. But what people don't know, or don't want to know, is that each roll of that paper is laced with pigments made from arsenic trioxide. Toxic dust just waiting to be stirred up by a little heat, a little moisture, or a slight breeze through the window. The funny, or, horrifying thing is that even when people did start getting sick, no one wanted to believe the wallpaper was to blame. Why would you? It's beautiful, tasteful, expensive. It's not the wallpaper's fault your children keep breaking out in rashes, or that your maid can't stop coughing, or that you feel faint every time you sit in your favourite chair. And besides, this is an era when doctors still argue about whether invisible mists cause disease. Germs are barely understood. Hygiene is inconsistent at best. And poison? Poison is everywhere. In your food, your cosmetics, your medicine cabinet. Why should your wallpaper be any different? Here's your historical fact. In the mid-1800s, it became increasingly clear that arsenic-based pigments, especially in wallpaper, were dangerous. Children died, servants collapsed, women wasted away in powdery green rooms. One famous case involved a girl who died mysteriously after prolonged exposure to a newly papered room. When they analysed the wallpaper, it turned out it was releasing arsenical gas in the damp conditions. But for years, manufacturers denied everything. It's not the wallpaper, they said. It must be something else. Poor ventilation, weak constitution, too many novels. The usual culprits. And here's your fringe fact. Some people actually collected arsenic wallpaper scraps, on purpose, like a hobby. There were little sample books, like morbid Victorian swatch collections. Historians and museum curators today still find them, and they have to wear gloves and store them in sealed containers. There are museum drawers labelled Danger Toxic Wallpaper. Imagine dying because your interior design preferences leaned too hard into the trendy. You pass by a row of homes now, peeking through tall windows into well-furnished parlours. Everything's neat and proper. There's probably a tea service on display, or a piano no one plays. And on the walls, that green. You see it shimmering in the lamplight. The homeowners sit calmly, sipping tea, not knowing or not believing that the very room around them is trying to kill them softly. It's almost poetic. You keep going, because looking too long at wealth makes your stomach twist in strange ways. It's not just the unfairness of it, it's the delusion. The idea that money protects you, even from invisible poisons. But arsenic doesn't care about your net worth. It doesn't check your bank account before it melts your lungs. You turn a corner and find yourself outside a chemist's shop. The window displays all the usual wares: tonics, powders, pills in neat little jars. Arsenic's in there too, by the way. You could walk in right now and buy some. Not for murder, of course. For medicinal purposes. It's been prescribed for everything from headaches to syphilis to female hysteria. You could drink it, wear it, even brush your teeth with it if you're feeling especially unlucky. There's actually a term for it: arsenic eaters. In certain parts of Europe, especially rural Austria, people believed tiny doses of arsenic made you look healthier, rosier cheeks, more energy, clearer skin. Some built up such a tolerance they could take enough to kill a horse and still walk to dinner. It was the 19th century version of a wellness trend. Arsenic for vitality, they said. And nobody questioned it too hard as long as the results looked good in candlelight. Of course, others weren't so lucky. Symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning: hair loss, confusion, weakness, organ failure, death. But it happened slowly. Days, weeks, sometimes years. A perfect slow burn. And the beauty of it, for the poisoner anyway, was that the symptoms mimicked natural illness. No one had to suspect foul play, especially not when the arsenic came from a well-intentioned doctor, or a beautiful wallpaper pattern, or a cake sprinkled with accidental contamination. There's a scholars' debate still circling this era. Just how many Victorian deaths were actually slow poisonings, never recorded, never caught? Some argue that entire families were lost to arsenic-laced flour or damp walls. Others say the numbers have been exaggerated, part of the grim mystique of the period. The truth probably lies in the graves of hundreds of people who coughed themselves to sleep in rooms painted the colour of death. You reach the edge of the wealthier district now, the green fading into browns and greys again, the sidewalks more cracked, the windows fogged with condensation and soot. But even here, you've seen that wallpaper. Second-hand, faded, handed down, reused, repurposed. Fashion trickles downward, just like poison. So next time someone tells you the Victorian age was elegant and refined, remember this. Their favourite colour was arsenic. Their curtains were gas chambers. Their interior design doubled as a slow, stylish execution. You don't know whether to laugh or gag, and you're suddenly very, very glad you can't afford nice wallpaper. You turn off the main street, heading toward the sound of chimney sweep bells and the rhythmic clatter of small feet on slate roofs. It's early evening now, that strange hour when London balances between the grinding misery of day and the boozy, smoky blur of night. For most people, it's a chance to eat whatever passes for dinner. For the city's smallest workers, though, the ones who've already put in more hours than you care to count, it's just another job done, lungs full of soot and skin scraped raw. You pass one of them crouched on a doorstep, maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. He's chewing on something, staring into nothing, covered in streaks of ash like a charcoal sketch brought to life. Child labour isn't a dirty secret in your world. It's business as usual. You see it everywhere. Boys hauling coal, girls hunched over sewing tables, toddlers chasing after bobbins in spinning mills, barefoot and silent, their little bodies pushed harder than most grown men could manage. Childhood, as a concept, is a luxury here. If you're poor, you're useful or you're invisible. Those are the options. You walk past a chimney sweep master yelling at a boy for not being fast enough. The boy nods like he understands, even though he's clearly too tired to process much beyond standing upright. He's got the classic look: cap, tattered waistcoat, eyes too old for his face. And it's not just boys who do the work. Girls get sent up chimneys too, though they're less likely to be seen afterward. Sometimes because they're sold into worse trades. Sometimes because they get stuck and don't come back down. See, chimneys aren't the roomy brick corridors you might imagine. They're narrow, jagged, pitch-black shafts that twist and turn through houses like angry veins. Some are only 9 inches wide, narrow enough that a child, if they held their breath and flattened their ribs, might be able to squeeze through. That's the hope anyway. You've heard of kids suffocating up there, or getting trapped when the soot caked around them collapsed in thick black waves. You've heard of others getting lit on fire when the house staff didn't realise someone was still inside the flue. And still, the work keeps coming, because soot makes the house dirty. And a dirty house? Well, that's just unthinkable. You know how these things go. The child dies, the house gets cleaned, and life carries on. A shrug. A funeral if they're lucky. and then a new apprentice is taken on, usually from the workhouse, usually for next to nothing. Here's your historical fact. In 1788, a law was passed requiring chimney sweeps to be at least 8 years old. By Victorian times, multiple reform acts tried to raise the working age or improve conditions, but they were often ignored or unenforced. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 was meant to crack down on the worst abuses, but it was toothless. Masters found loopholes. Parents were desperate enough to sign their children away. Inspectors couldn't, or wouldn't, keep up. It wasn't until the late 1860s, after decades of horror stories and pressure from reformers, that legislation started to stick. But even then, nothing changed overnight. You still see those soot-streaked faces, still hear the coughs, still know that if someone doesn't work, they don't eat. Reform is a long, uphill climb, and no one seems to be in a hurry. You reach a textile factory just as its doors are clanging shut for the night. A group of girls, barely in their teens, files out, eyes down, shoulders slumped. Their hands are red from boiling water, their backs stooped from long hours bending over machines. One of them holds a finger wrapped in a bloody rag. Another has a cough that sounds like it came from someone twice her age. You don't need to ask what they earn. Pennies, maybe a slice of bread, maybe nothing but a place to sit out of the rain while they ruin their eyesight in the gaslight haze. And don't even get started on the matchstick girls. You've met one or two, their hands stained yellow from phosphorus, their breath sharp with chemical fumes. The unlucky ones develop phossy jaw, a condition so grotesque it sounds made up but isn't. Their jawbones literally rot from the inside, crumbling like old chalk, leaving them disfigured and in agony. Employers tell them to smile more, or not at all. Here's your fringe fact for tonight. Some kids worked as mudlarks, scavenging the banks of the Thames for bits of metal, coal, nails, anything they could sell. They'd wade waist-deep through the sludge, dodging dead dogs and broken glass, hoping to find a bent spoon or a coin. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept them out of the workhouse. Barely. The younger you were, the more useful. Smaller hands meant you could reach further into the muck, further under the machinery, further up the chimneys. Of course, there's a scholarly debate about just how common all this really was. Some historians argue that the worst examples, kids dying in flus or coughing themselves to death at 12, were more extreme than typical. Others say that focusing on the few model factories or apprenticeships misses the big picture. The truth probably lies in between. Yes, some employers were better than others, but thousands of children worked themselves into early graves while the rest of society debated their worth. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a boy sleeping against a barrel. He's using a rolled-up newspaper as a pillow and snoring softly. His shirt's torn, and he's missing a shoe, but he's breathing. That's something. His fingers twitch like he's still working in his sleep, maybe winding thread, maybe scraping soot from a flue. You wonder if he dreams. You wonder if it even matters. Childhood isn't a protected time here. It's a transaction, a commodity, a phase you pass through if you're rich, and skip entirely if you're not. You're not surprised anymore when you see a 6-year-old balancing a tray of matches or a 7-year-old with scars on their palms. It's just the city's heartbeat, thudding quietly under the surface. And you? You keep walking because you're not a child anymore, because your own childhood, if you had one, was brief, grey, and quickly filed under irrelevant. You had your first job at what, 10? 9? You've stopped counting. But even now, as the lamps flicker and the city exhales another long sigh of soot, you can't help glancing over your shoulder. You half expect to see another child crawling out of a chimney, coughing up smoke and blinking at the stars. Instead, you see nothing. Just the shadows of a city that keeps asking more of the smallest hands. By the time night fully settles over the city, the streets shift again. The day's clamour fades, and in its place comes something slower, thicker, and altogether more dangerous. The air smells sharper, like sweat and burnt sugar, and the gaslights throw long, bent shadows over the slick cobbles. You pass groups huddled together, some laughing too loudly, some arguing, and some quiet in a way that makes you keep walking. Because nighttime in Victorian London doesn't belong to the living so much as to the coping. Those trying to drown out the day, numb the cold, or disappear entirely. And for that, you've got 3 options, depending on your wallet and your pain tolerance: tea, gin, or laudanum. The sacred trifecta of Victorian substances: legal, cheap, and catastrophically addictive. You head toward a cart with a glowing kettle and a woman shouting, "Hot tea! Halfpenny a cup!" She looks like she's been awake since the century started, hair tied in a rag, apron stained. Her tea is boiled with crushed leaves, old water, and maybe a whisper of actual tea if you're lucky. But it's warm, it's something to hold, and that alone makes it worth the coin. You drop your last halfpenny and take the tin cup she hands you. It burns your tongue a little. That's fine. You need the burn. Tea is the drink of the working class. Not the polished, pinky-out kind sipped in drawing rooms, but the survival kind. Dark, bitter, scalding, mixed with condensed milk or thick syrup if you're lucky. It's served in chipped cups and passed hand to hand under the factory gates. It keeps you upright. It makes you feel human for a few seconds. And in a world where sleep is rare and food is worse, tea is sometimes the only thing between you and collapse. You sit on a low wall and sip while a group of dock workers trade stories nearby, laughing like men who don't want to think too hard. One of them pulls out a small bottle, brown glass, no label. They all glance around. Then he uncorks it and takes a swig, coughing after. "Mother's ruin," someone mutters. You know the smell before it even reaches you. Cheap gin. Harsh, oily, with a hint of turpentine and old lies. Gin has a reputation here, not just as a drink, but as a problem. In the slums, it's everywhere. Distilled in back alleys, sold in jugs, and poured into tin cups with no questions asked. It's cheaper than beer, easier to find than clean water, and strong enough to erase a memory in one gulp. Entire families fall into it. Mothers feed it to teething babies, fathers lose their jobs to it, and the city watches it happen, wrings its hands and puts up temperance posters that no one reads. Here's your historical fact. During the 18th century, Britain went through what's now called the gin craze, a full-blown epidemic of addiction that carried over into the 19th century in smaller, but no less tragic waves. At its peak, gin was sold in shops, on corners, even out of vending machines. The government eventually cracked down with taxes and regulations, but by then, the damage was generational. And in places like Whitechapel or Southwark, the gin never really went away. It just got cheaper, stronger, meaner. And then there's laudanum. You've seen it. You've used it. Everyone has, or knows someone who does. It's sold openly at apothecaries, no prescription needed, in pretty little bottles with elegant labels. Laudanum is a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, and it's stronger than it looks. You take it for pain, for nerves, for sleeplessness, for the cough that won't quit. It's medicine, they say. Doctors prescribe it to children. Pregnant women use it for morning sickness. Artists claim it opens the mind. The poets? Oh, the poets love it. You pass a man slouched against a doorway, his eyes glassy, a bottle still clutched in his fingers. His lips are moving, whispering something that might be a prayer or a curse. You don't look too closely. You've been that man before. Maybe you'll be him again. And here's your fringe fact. Laudanum wasn't just for the desperate or the poor. It was fashionable. Widely used by middle and upper-class Victorians. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Charles Dickens. Many well-known figures were either quietly addicted or publicly praising its effects. It was marketed in ladies' magazines as a remedy for feminine complaints and sold in candy for children. Some addicts didn't even know they were addicted. They just knew that without it the world hurt more than usual. You finish your tea, your hands still cold. There's no real comfort in the drink, just a moment of less discomfort. You toss the cup back on the cart and wander toward a narrow passage, a shortcut through the market stalls where bootleg sellers pass off spirits that taste like they were distilled in a coffin. You pass a woman arguing with a vendor about the quality of her gin, accusing him of watering it down with urine. You don't stick around for the resolution. This is the nightly ritual of thousands, maybe millions. Pour something in, numb the edges, hope the dreams aren't worse than the day. Gin, tea, laudanum. If you're lucky, just one. If you're not, all three. And if you're truly beyond saving, maybe you chase it all with a fifth substance. Something stronger. Something sold in the corners of chemist shops under names like Godfrey's Cordial or Dalby's Carminative. They're all opiates, just dressed up prettier. There's a debate among scholars about the true extent of addiction in Victorian England. Some argue the dangers have been overstated, that most users were responsible, casual, or too poor to afford enough to overdose. Others point to burial records, hospital logs, and diaries that speak of slow deaths in locked rooms and mothers who rocked empty cradles. But what's not debated is this. Victorian society was soaked in drugs and drink. It was part of the architecture, as normal as gas lamps and horse dung. You step out of the alley and into the glow of another gin palace, a dazzling contrast to the tenements around it. Mirrors, chandeliers, and brass rails. The kind of place that looks like wealth, but smells like desperation. A couple stumbles out, laughing too loud. She has lipstick smudged. He's missing a shoe. They won't remember this tomorrow, and that's probably the point. You walk on, past the singing, the vomiting, the occasional fight, past the kid curled on the stoop with his hands still around a cup of tea, past the woman you saw last week, now sitting in the same spot, eyes duller than before. The city blinks around you, a little drunk, a little high, and you wonder, when it all finally crashes, what's going to be left? Just the fog and the quiet? Or just you, with a half-empty bottle and no memory of how you got there? You wake to bells, not church bells, not alarm bells, morning bells. Soft, solemn, deliberate tolls that roll through the morning air like a black veil. The kind of sound that doesn't so much ring as settle into your bones. And in Victorian London it means one thing. Someone's died, and now it's time to turn grief into an event. You sit up, stretching the stiffness from your limbs, and for a moment you forget what day it is. But then you see her, an older woman in full morning dress gliding past the alley mouth, black from head to toe, veil hanging like spider silk, posture impossibly upright. Grief here doesn't slouch. It poses. This is a culture where death isn't just expected, it's scheduled, rehearsed, performed. The Victorians don't do casual grief. They do theatrical, rules-heavy, all-consuming grief, complete with wardrobe changes, etiquette books, and mourning periods that last longer than most modern marriages. You could lose a spouse and spend 2 solid years dressed like a walking shadow. Longer if you're a woman, shorter if you're a man, because, of course. And the clothes. Oh, the clothes. Black wool, heavy crepe, thick veils that trap heat and dust and sadness. Jewellery made from jet or sometimes hair. Yes, human hair. Woven into brooches or lockets or even rings. Hair was personal, sentimental, portable. A keepsake you could wear while crying into your soup. You make your way through the streets, joining the slow, silent current of people moving toward the church. The funeral's already begun, and you don't know the deceased, but that hardly matters. In this city, death has a gravitational pull. It drags people in whether they knew the corpse or not. Curiosity, obligation, or just the hope of some free food afterward. People come, and the mourners play their parts with the grim precision of stage actors. You spot the widow, her face pale beneath her veil, flanked by 2 other women in nearly identical garb. Widow's weeds, they call it. A term that somehow makes grief sound like a garden infestation. Here's your historical fact. Queen Victoria herself turned mourning into a national obsession. When Prince Albert died in 1861, she basically never took off her black clothes again. For 40 years she dressed in mourning, appearing in public only rarely, surrounded by symbols of her loss. The country followed suit, quite literally. Mourning became both a fashion industry and a moral expectation. If you didn't grieve correctly, you weren't just impolite, you were suspect. Which leads us to the etiquette, a labyrinth of rules and timers and social landmines. A widow must mourn for 2 years, full mourning, no jewellery, heavy black, for the first year, then half mourning, subtle lavender or grey in the second. Children mourned parents for 6 months. Siblings, 3 months. A cousin, maybe a black armband if you liked them. And heaven forbid you laugh too soon, or go dancing or wear colour before the timeline expired. People noticed. People gossiped. You pause near a shop selling mourning clothes. Yes, there are stores for this. Full-length gowns line the windows, displayed like high fashion, though their purpose is anything but celebratory. There are even mourning bonnets and gloves pre-approved for grief. The store next door sells stationery edged in black for your condolences and announcements, everything you need to suffer publicly and properly. But here's your fringe fact for today. Some people made an absolute killing off of death. Professional mourners could be hired to cry convincingly at funerals. Photographers offered post-mortem portraits where the deceased would be posed, sometimes propped up to look alive, alongside their family members. And then there were entire businesses devoted to keeping mourning respectable. If you couldn't afford the full year of black attire, you could rent it, borrow your sadness, like a library book. And speaking of funerals, This one is nearing its crescendo. The coffin is being lowered, the priest murmuring his Latin phrases over the open grave. A few people cry. Most just look tired. You hear the thump of earth hitting wood, and then, just like that, it's over. Mourning begins. But here's where it gets complicated. Because grief is one thing, but grief as a public performance? That's something else entirely. Scholars still debate whether Victorian mourning was deeply felt or just another form of social armour. Did people truly mourn for years? Or were they just afraid of being seen not mourning? Was it devotion or pressure? Sincerity or survival? You suspect it was both. Like everything else in this city, emotion is tangled up with performance. People feel, yes, but they also know they're being watched, judged, so they do what's expected. They wear the black, write the cards, pose for the photograph beside a dead uncle who smells just slightly off, and they cry, sometimes. Or they don't. The rules don't care about your actual feelings, only that you follow them. You wander past the cemetery gates and into a nearby tea room. One of those converted parlours where the middle class gather to discuss death like it's a social hobby. They sip their weak tea, dab at their eyes, and trade stories about the dearly departed. There's a woman in half mourning, wearing a lavender shawl, talking about how her cousin died of a delicate condition, which everyone knows is code for tuberculosis, but no one says aloud. Another man is passing around a mourning ring with a lock of hair sealed under the glass. They nod politely, cooing over the craftsmanship. You don't stay long. That kind of grief, dressed up and powdered and perfumed, makes you itch. You've seen the other kind. The kind that doesn't have time for etiquette. The kind that shows up in alleys and workhouses where bodies are buried without names and mourning lasts just long enough to finish a shift. The kind that doesn't wear black, because black is expensive. That grief just swallows you whole and moves on. And so, you keep walking. Past the flower sellers hawking wilted wreaths, past the boy carrying a basket of memorial cards, past the whispers of who wore what and for how long, and whether it was appropriate. Because in this city, death isn't just a fact of life. It's a style, a statement, a brand. And you, for better or worse, are not in mourning, not today, but give it time, you head west, away from the mourning crowd and into a quieter part of town, where the fog is thinner and the lamplighters work in a slower rhythm. It's the kind of place where things feel off, not sinister exactly, just slightly out of step, like a dream that doesn't quite line up with your memory. Houses here are taller, older, their windows too high and too many. There are fewer people on the street, and those who are out don't make eye contact. They move like they're trying not to be noticed, or maybe like they're watching something you can't see. You stop outside one house in particular, tall, grey stone, its windows completely blacked out. There's no name on the door, no number, no sound. But you've heard stories, everyone has, about this house, or one just like it. The kind of house that hums at night. The kind that hosts seances behind velvet curtains, and whose residents whisper about energies and ectoplasm and knocking from the other side. Yes, you're in spiritualist territory now. Spiritualism in Victorian London isn't just a fringe obsession. It's a movement. A full-blown cultural moment. The dead are never quite gone here. They linger, just out of sight, just out of reach. And people, especially those with money and recently dead loved ones, will pay good coin to try and hear from them. Enter the mediums, the clairvoyants, the table turners, and the ghost photographers. And if they happen to wear gauzy robes and speak in mysterious voices during candlelit rituals, all the better. You wander past a sandwich board advertising Madame l'Espérance, medium to the Queen's Court, which you're pretty sure is a stretch. But she's not alone. Dozens of spiritual advisors have popped up in recent years, offering the grieving elite a way to bypass that whole mourning period and go straight to cosy chats with their dead uncles. Here's your historical fact. Spiritualism exploded in Britain in the mid-19th century, spreading from America after the infamous Fox sisters claimed they could communicate with spirits through mysterious knocking sounds. Whether you believed them or not didn't seem to matter, because by the 1860s seances were a social event. Even people who scoffed at ghosts still showed up. Part entertainment, part ritual, all spectacle. You remember attending one a few years ago, more out of boredom than belief. The room was heavy with incense. The table shook a little, maybe by trick, maybe not. A trumpet floated in the air which everyone gasped at, though you noticed the wires. The medium went into a trance, speaking in a voice that sounded like someone trying very hard to be an elderly sailor. But still, when the lights dimmed and the whispers started, even you felt something tighten in your chest. Not fear, something worse. Hope. That's the thing about spiritualism. It's not just about ghosts. It's about needing to believe there's more than this. More than smog and soot and early graves. More than cheap gin and expensive funerals. If the dead are still here, then maybe death isn't the end. Maybe your losses aren't permanent. Maybe no one really disappears. And that idea? That sells. You stop by a newsstand and glance at the headlines. Apparition photographed in Kensington. Medium reveals Prince's lost message. Ghost child warns of East End fire. All dramatic. All unverified. But people buy them. You've even seen spiritualist newspapers, entire publications devoted to seances, predictions, ghost etiquette, and letters from the other side. Some of them are written with such sincerity it makes your teeth ache. And here's your fringe fact. There was a man named William Crookes, a respected chemist and physicist, who claimed he had scientifically confirmed the existence of spirits. He conducted experiments with a medium named Florence Cook, who would allegedly materialize a spirit named Katie King. She'd appear in full form, speak, walk around, and vanish again. Skeptics, of course, had a field day. But Crookes swore by it. And when people questioned his credibility, he just doubled down, because even scientists get lonely. The debate over spiritualism rages in the press, in lecture halls, in drawing rooms. Are mediums con artists or sensitive souls? Are seances fraud or faith? Some say the whole thing is a scam preying on the vulnerable. Others insist it's proof of a deeper truth, that the veil between this world and the next is thinner than we think. You're not sure what you believe, but you've seen enough people cry at empty chairs to know that sometimes belief doesn't need evidence. Sometimes it just needs silence and candlelight, and the promise that someone, somewhere, is still listening. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a young man clutching a camera the size of a small cupboard. He's adjusting the tripod while his assistant sets up a black curtain behind a couple standing stiffly in formal clothes. It looks like a typical portrait until you notice the sign. Spirit photography, guaranteed results, or no fee. Now there's a business model. Take a picture, develop the plate, and, surprise, there's a faint white blur in the background just behind your shoulder. Is it your deceased brother? Your late husband? The baby who died last winter? Sure, why not? The image is vague enough that anyone can project meaning onto it. It's grief's Rorschach test. You see what you need to see. And here's the twist. Some people know it's fake and still want it. They ask for the spirit to be added, like ordering a side of hope with your trauma. It's not about proof. It's about comfort, about control. You can't stop death, but you can pose next to it and hang the result on your parlour wall. As you walk on, you notice more spiritualist symbols hidden in plain sight. A shop selling crystal balls next to one advertising mourning jewellery. A church pamphlet debating Christian seances, as if Jesus might approve of knocking 3 times for yes. The whole city seems caught between worlds, flesh and shadow, logic and longing. And maybe that's the point. London is filled with ghosts, not the sheet-wearing kind, but the memories that hang in fog and brick. The brother who never came home, the child lost to fever, the mother who never stopped waiting at the window. You carry them with you, tucked in your coat, whispering in your ear. You don't need a medium to hear them, just quiet, just stillness. But still, you pause in front of one of the seance posters. You consider the date, the time, the price. And for a moment you imagine going, sitting in that room, watching the table tremble, listening for your name in the dark. Then you shake it off. The dead don't talk to people like you. They've got enough to worry about. You cut through a side street near Covent Garden, where the scent of roasting chestnuts briefly masks the usual cocktail of horse droppings and humanity. Around you, the city's tempo is shifting again. Evening proper has arrived, and London's ready to put on its strangest show. You're heading toward a different kind of theatre. Not the kind with velvet curtains and Shakespearean actors, but the kind with drums, banners, gaslit stages, and living, breathing exhibits that blur the line between performance and exploitation. Welcome to the Victorian Freak Show. It doesn't advertise itself that way, of course, not always. The signs say, marvels of nature, or human curiosities, or in tonight's case, the wonders of the world collected in one room. You know exactly what that means. You duck into a low building with peeling paint and a too-eager man at the door barking out the attractions. Come see the bearded lady, the stone man of Bombay, the elephant boy, the world's smallest married couple. His voice is pure showmanship, equal parts carnival barker and undertaker. And inside? It's hotter than you'd expect. Smells like sweat, sawdust, and sugar roasted past the point of no return. The crowd is a mix of curious middle-class families, giggling adolescents, and the sort of men who think watching a woman lift a cannonball is a suitable prelude to dinner. They jostle for position near a low stage where the first act is already underway. A man billed as the Lizard of Kent, with skin thickened by disease, contorting under bright gaslights, while a violin screeches along. A woman whispers to her husband, "How tragic," then laughs a moment later when the man makes a joke about shedding skin. It's entertainment with a side of guilt, washed down with lemon sweets. You wander deeper, past velvet curtains and glass cases displaying questionable oddities, a stuffed two-headed lamb, a shriveled mermaid cobbled together from fish bones and papier-mâché, a set of preserved conjoined rat skeletons labelled Satan's mice. It's part science, part hoax, and entirely Victorian. Then there are the living exhibits, real people, many of whom had no other option. There's the giant, who towers over the crowd and smiles wearily as children tug at his coat. There's the dwarf couple, standing beside a sign proclaiming them Mr. and Mrs. Fairyfolk, a love larger than life. They hold hands and wave, but you see the glaze in their eyes. You've seen it before. It's the look of people who've performed their own existence so many times they're not sure where the act ends. Here's your historical fact. Freak shows in Victorian England weren't just sideshows. They were part of mainstream culture. People like Joseph Merrick, better known as the Elephant Man, became celebrities. Others, like Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins, toured extensively and even settled in the United States. These weren't just curiosities. They were human stories, twisted for profit and stripped of dignity. But not everyone saw them that way. Some Victorians insisted these shows were educational. Natural philosophy, they called it. A way to study biology and humanity's boundaries. Others argued it was charity, that by paying to see these individuals you were giving them a livelihood. Maybe, but most of the time it was about spectacle, about gasping at bodies that didn't fit the mould, about making difference into a performance. You step into a smaller room at the back, dimly lit, quieter. A woman stands on a platform, still as stone. Her beard is thick, curled carefully, and she wears a gown that would be fashionable anywhere else. Her name, Miss Clementine, according to the sign, echoes in the hush. She smiles slightly, as if daring you to laugh. But you don't, you just nod. She nods back. The moment passes, and here's your fringe fact. Some performers leaned into their fame, even leveraged it into power. Julia Pastrana, often billed as the Bear Woman, toured Europe singing opera. She was fluent in multiple languages, musically trained and well-educated. She also had a condition called hypertrichosis, which caused thick hair growth on her face and body. Audiences came to gawk, but she came to perform, to reclaim a sliver of agency. It didn't always work, but sometimes it almost did. There's debate today among scholars and curators about how to discuss these shows. Should they be remembered as cruel exploitation or early forms of empowerment? Were the performers victims or entrepreneurs? The answer is yes, both, neither, somewhere in between. It depends on who you ask and what day it is. You exit the back room and find yourself near the food stall, where sausages sizzle and children squeal over penny sweets. One boy's imitating the giant with exaggerated stomping. His mother smacks his arm and tells him to behave, then immediately turns to giggle with her friend about the tattooed man. Around you, the night is alive with music and fire eaters, and the shrill excitement of people grateful, for a moment, not to be the ones on display. You leave through the side door and slip into the cool air, the stink of sweat and popcorn still clinging to your clothes. The gaslights blur a little in the mist, and the noise fades behind you. You don't know what you feel. Pity, disgust, admiration, guilt, maybe all of them, maybe none. What you do know is this: the freak show doesn't end when you walk out. Victorian London is one big stage. The rich parade their grief, the poor perform their desperation, the sick are shuffled into charity hospitals, and the mentally ill become curiosities for doctors to poke at. Everyone's on display for someone. You just hope you're not next. So you pull your coat tighter and walk on. Past the shops, past the gawkers, past the posters announcing the next miracle, marvel or misfit. You keep your head down, knowing full well that in this city it's never a question of if you'll be watched. Only when. You're halfway down a narrow street lined with milliners and tailors when you hear it. The unmistakable whoomph of something catching fire followed by a shriek. A real one. Not theatrical. Not the kind you hear in music halls or penny operas. This one has weight. The kind that makes you stop walking. Makes everyone stop walking. It echoes off the walls like a dropped lantern. You glance down the alley where it came from and see smoke curling upward. Thin at first, then thicker, rising fast into the night like a signal flare. You run, and as you round the corner you're hit with a blast of heat. The fabric shop is already half alight, flames licking the upper window, and someone's crying out from inside. There are shouts. Someone's calling for a bucket, another for a constable, but everyone's hesitating. Because this fire isn't just any fire. This one started in a crinoline. You catch sight of her, what's left of her, being pulled out of the building by two frantic men, her skirts still smouldering, the air thick with burnt silk and scorched hair. People are panicking, confused. A woman faints. A boy throws a pail of water that barely hits the edge of the blaze. The crowd expands and contracts like a lung, unsure whether to rush in or run away. You choose the smart option. You move. Because this isn't your first crinoline fire. Crinolines are a fashion miracle and a public hazard. Wide hoop skirts made of horsehair and steel, worn under layers of petticoats and fine fabric to give women that bell-shaped silhouette, the one that screams refinement and respectability. But add a fireplace, a dropped match, or a candle set a little too close, and suddenly you've got a human lantern. The skirts catch, the air underneath fans the flame, and the woman inside doesn't stand a chance. It's disturbingly common, and yet they keep wearing them. You duck into a side alley to avoid the worst of the smoke and sit for a moment, watching the sky change colour as the flames die down. Your hands are shaking just a bit. The worst part isn't the fire itself, it's how quickly it ends. 1 minute a woman is laughing at a joke, adjusting her hatpin, the next she's ash and bone. And still, tomorrow, another dressmaker will pin together another gown with yards of flammable fabric, and no one will think twice. Here's your historical fact. Crinoline fires were responsible for hundreds of deaths during the mid-19th century. Newspapers reported them frequently. Women who brushed too close to a hearth or stood too long near a candlelit display. One tragic case described a duchess who burst into flames during a dinner party. Her husband tried to smother the fire with a tablecloth, but she died within minutes, and yet the crinoline remained in style for decades. Because fashion, like arsenic wallpaper and laudanum-laced cough syrup, rarely asks permission from common sense. You step back onto the main road, the fire behind you now, though the image of the woman's blackened skirt still clings like soot to your thoughts. Around you, life resumes. A group of young women in matching gowns and hats strut past, skirts swaying like bells with every step. You wonder if they know, if they care. Maybe they do. Maybe they've decided it's worth the risk to look like society expects. After all, being seen is half the point of surviving here. A woman in mourning garb is invisible. A woman in crinoline, she occupies space. That alone can be power. And here's your fringe fact. Some dresses of the time were so wide that women had trouble fitting through doorways. There are stories of fashionably dressed ladies needing assistance to pass through entrances or sit in carriages, like decorative furniture with lungs. And in crowds, forget it. The skirts acted like rolling barricades. Some men complained they were being edged off sidewalks entirely. Satirical magazines printed cartoons of women using their crinolines as weapons or storage containers. But underneath the mockery was an uncomfortable truth. When women took up space, even in ridiculous, flammable ways, it unsettled people. You pass a window where a seamstress is still working by lamplight. Her display mannequin is already dressed in tomorrow's trends, tight bodices, puffed sleeves, and yes, a brand new crinoline. You watch her pin the hem, smooth the fabric, adjust the waist with the precision of a surgeon. The dress is stunning. Deadly too, but that's the price, isn't it? Fashion is never just about clothes, it's about signalling. Who you are, what you believe, how much you can afford to suffer. Victorian style doesn't whisper, it shouts. Morning black, arsenic green, soot-streaked bonnets, corsets that cinch until your ribs shift like tectonic plates. And no, it's not comfortable, but it's what's correct. There's an argument still circling among historians. Was Victorian fashion oppressive, empowering, or both? Did the crinoline free women from tight leg-restricting skirts? Or did it turn them into fire hazards on stilts? Some say it was revolutionary, making space for women in a world that tried to shrink them. Others say it was just another form of control disguised as elegance. The truth, as always, is complicated. The answer shifts depending on who's wearing the dress and why. You keep walking, now careful not to brush against any open flames or candlelit windows. The shops are closing. The last of the market vendors are packing up. A gust of wind sends a bit of ash swirling into your path. You step over it. Somewhere behind you the fire brigade arrives. Too late, of course. Always too late. But it doesn't matter. The dress is gone. The woman is gone. The fashion lives on. Tomorrow someone else will step into a crinoline, look in the mirror and feel proud, beautiful, seen. And maybe that's enough to make them forget how flammable they are. You don't remember when the advertisement started exactly, just that one day they were everywhere. Tucked between classified job listings and notices about missing cats, they began quietly enough. Gentleman of means seek sincere lady for companionship. Then came more. Lively widow, 34, would entertain suitors with view to matrimony. By now, entire pages of the paper are filled with them. Small, polite pleas from the lonely, looking to bridge the cold Victorian void with a few hopeful lines and a stamped envelope. Welcome to the world of the lonely hearts and the bizarre, slightly romantic chaos of the mail-order marriage. You're sitting on the edge of a park bench chewing a bit of crust from someone's leftover lunch, watching a man across the square nervously rereading a letter. He folds it again, unfolds it, smooths it out. He's clean-shaven but twitchy, wearing a coat that's just a bit too good for someone loitering in a public garden. He's not waiting for a friend, he's waiting for a stranger. That's the thing with these marriage ads, they're both thrilling and terrifying. You write to someone you've never seen, describe yourself in hopeful but vague terms, moderate means, strong moral character, fond of dogs, and trust that what you receive in return won't be a scam, a prank, or, in some notorious cases, a trap. Because while many use these ads earnestly, to find love, or at least a decent match, others use them for less sentimental reasons. You saw it last month. A woman conned out of her savings by a man claiming to be a banker. Turned out he was a butcher, deeply in debt, with 3 wives in 3 counties. Another case involved a widow, who forgot to mention that her late husband was actually still very much alive and living in the attic. These stories make the rounds at pubs and tea shops, half joke, half cautionary tale. Here's your historical fact. The rise of Lonely Hearts advertisements and marriage by post really did gain traction during the Victorian era, especially as industrialisation scattered families and isolated individuals across the country. Urban migration, long work hours and strict social rules made traditional courtship nearly impossible for many. So people turned to print. Newspapers like the Matrimonial News and the Family Herald offered designated sections for these hopeful messages. Some matches worked, some didn't. A few ended in murder. But it was better than waiting in a drawing room hoping a neighbour's son might fancy you before you turned 30 and aged out of the marriage market entirely. You walk past a newsstand now and sure enough the ads are still there. Dozens of them. You scan a few for fun. Stout gentleman, age 52, seeks quiet lady to share rural life. Lively redhead, widow twice over, no dependents, loves pigeons. God-fearing woman, 26, looking for tall man with strong arms and clean habits. You pause. That last one sounds oddly specific. Maybe she's serious. And here's your fringe fact. Some of these courtship by mail endeavours grew into international businesses. You could write to potential spouses across the ocean, Canada, America, even Australia. There were catalogues. Pages of faces and descriptions like some tragic 19th century version of a dating app, only slower and with more cholera. In frontier towns especially, where women were scarce, men would send for wives they'd never met. Some women, desperate to escape poverty or scandal, jumped at the chance. Others quickly realised that landowner with prospects meant drunk man in a shed with chickens. You wander into a modest post office watching the clerks sort letters like they're handling secrets. One woman, cheeks flushed, hands over a pink envelope with a floral wax seal. She glances around, as if embarrassed to be seen sending it. The man behind her drops off a plain one marked urgent. You wonder what his letter says. You wonder what hers hopes it says. You move on. Because despite all the risk and all the mockery, these paper connections mean something. For many Victorians, the constraints of society, especially for women, were suffocating. You couldn't strike up a conversation with a stranger on the street. You couldn't loiter without suspicion. Every interaction had to be chaperoned, censored, stiff. But in a letter, you could breathe. You could be bold, funny, flirty, even a little scandalous. The envelope was both mask and invitation. Of course, there were rules, always rules. Some etiquette guides even gave templates. How to respond to a first letter, how long to wait before suggesting a meeting, what kind of paper to use, and what sort of handwriting conveyed the right level of seriousness. Too flowery, desperate, too plain, cold. A well-placed flourish could mean the difference between romance and rejection. And here's the rub. These exchanges were rarely just about romance. They were often about escape. A woman might want out of her family home, where she was little more than unpaid labour. A man might want a wife to help manage his shop, his land, or his loneliness. Love was nice, but practical compatibility mattered more. Could she cook? Could he earn? Did they have teeth? You pass a pub where someone's reading out one of the more outrageous ads to a group of guffawing patrons. Listen to this. Modestly built spinster with modest expectations seeks modest gentleman for modest companionship, must not drink, gamble, or speak above a whisper. The crowd roars. You smile just a little. It's easy to laugh until you realise these ads are written by real people, and for many, they're a last shot at something resembling affection. There's academic debate, of course. Some argue that the Lonely Hearts phenomenon gave agency to people, especially women, who had few other avenues to choose their partners. Others insist it was just another form of commodification, where people listed themselves like products, judged on income, appearance, and virtue. Maybe both are true. The lines blur when desperation and hope overlap. You step into a small shop that sells paper, ink, and the occasional sentimental card. The clerk eyes you, probably wondering if you're here to write a love letter or a confession. You buy a single sheet of paper and a stub of pencil, just in case. You don't write anything yet, but maybe tonight you'll start a letter. Something short, honest. A few words to someone who might never read them. And if you do, you'll keep it vague. Just enough to make them curious. Just enough to remind yourself that even in this soot-stained city, with all its death and noise, there's still room for someone to want you, even if it's only in ink. You're halfway through folding the paper when a voice behind you mutters, "Waste of postage." You turn, just enough to see an older man in a crumpled waistcoat spitting tobacco juice into the gutter, like it owes him money. "Love letters," he scoffs, eyeing the paper in your hand. "Better off romancing a corpse. At least they don't talk back." With that, he ambles off, chuckling to himself, boots slapping through puddles. You're not sure whether to laugh or shudder, because tonight romance and corpses are closer together than most people would like to admit. You slip the paper into your coat and head toward the West End, where the street lamps are brighter and the fog takes its time. The buildings change here, less soot-stained, more polished. You pass tea shops with gleaming windows, chemists with expensive tonics on display, and bookshops selling penny dreadfuls stacked like forbidden fruit. But tonight, you're not here for novels. You're here for something much older, much deader. There's a line outside the drawing room of a certain Lord Ashcombe, wealthy, eccentric, recently returned from Egypt with a mummy in tow and an appetite for theatrics. The invitation had made its way across the city by rumour and ink. Mummy unwrapping, this Friday 8 p.m. All civilised minds welcome. Nothing like an ancient corpse to spice up a Victorian evening. You manage to talk your way inside. Easy, really, when half the crowd is here for the spectacle, not the science. The drawing room is dimly lit, thick with perfume and cigar smoke, full of people pretending to be intellectuals while gripping their wine glasses too tightly. There's a mummy on the table, wrapped head to toe in linen, its form narrow, almost childlike. Beside it, a man in formal wear prepares his tools. Gloved hands, polished scalpel, a smirk that says he's done this before and found it rather enjoyable. Yes, this is a real thing. Victorians loved Egypt. Obsessed over it, really. The pyramids, the hieroglyphs, the gods with animal heads. To them, Egypt was the ultimate exotic playground, full of secrets and ripe for pillaging. Archaeologists, most of them little more than well-dressed looters, shipped artifacts home by the ton. Statues, scrolls, sarcophagi, and of course, mummies. So many mummies. Here's your historical fact. During the 19th century, it became fashionable in Britain to host mummy unwrapping parties. These weren't sacred rituals or academic studies. They were dinner party entertainment. Guests would gather in parlors to watch as the wrappings were peeled back, one layer at a time, while someone, usually a self-proclaimed expert, offered commentary between sips of sherry. It was grotesque, and somehow deeply popular. You watch now as the host cuts away the first linen band, releasing a faint puff of ancient dust. There's a hush, somewhere between awe and discomfort. The body beneath is desiccated, skin darkened and leathery, fingers curled inward like a sleeping bird's claws. Someone gasps. Another person chuckles nervously. A woman in a violet gown whispers, "Do you think she was a queen?" As if that would make this better. It won't. The host makes a joke about curses. The crowd laughs. Of course they laugh, because the idea of a curse makes them feel daring, even as they desecrate someone's eternal rest with wine breath and side comments. You spot someone sketching in a notebook, eyes wide behind thick spectacles. Maybe he'll publish this in a magazine, add a few flourishes, call it science. Meanwhile, the corpse lies silent, its dignity unravelling strip by strip. Here's your fringe fact. Mummy powder, yes, real ground-up mummy, was used as medicine in Europe for centuries. Believed to contain mystical healing properties, it was prescribed for everything from bruises to internal bleeding. Apothecaries sold it by the ounce. Even artists used it to create a paint pigment called mummy brown. People literally painted with the dead. The demand was so high that when actual mummies ran low, some dealers began making fake ones out of criminals and the poor. Death meet capitalism. Back in the drawing room, the unwrapping continues. There's gold leaf under one layer, bits of amulets, the occasional beetle. You can't help but wonder who this person was. Did she ask to be preserved for eternity only to become a parlour sideshow? Did she pray to her gods, imagining a peaceful afterlife, unaware she'd be unwrapped by strangers with wine-stained teeth? A man near you says, "I hear the Egyptians used to remove the brain through the nose." You glance at him. "Want to try it yourself?" you ask, deadpan. He looks away. Good. And here's the scholarly debate still circling. Were these unwrappings really about curiosity and education, or were they colonial arrogance dressed in silk gloves? Some argue that the Victorians genuinely believed they were studying the past, contributing to knowledge. Others say it was just another form of imperialism, taking what wasn't theirs and putting it on display, then patting themselves on the back for being civilized. It's hard to ignore that most of these events featured no Egyptian voices, no consent, no context, just silence and slicing. The unwrapping is nearly done. The face is exposed now. You lean in, just slightly. It's not scary, it's sad. The mouth is open a little, as if mid-sentence, as if she was trying to speak and no one listened for 3,000 years. Her eyes are sunken, the sockets deep. Someone says, "Remarkable preservation." Another replies, "She looks like she's about to curse us." But she doesn't. She just lies there, still. The room begins to clear out. People murmur polite phrases. Fascinating. Quite the evening. A rare treat as they gather their coats. The host raises his glass in a final toast to science and progress. You want to throw it back in his face. You leave quietly, slipping out into the cool air. The street is silent, moonlight sharp against the cobbles. Behind you, the house glows like a lantern. Elegant, cold, full of ghosts. You don't know her name, no one in there cared to ask, but you carry her face with you now. A reminder that the dead are not decorations, that history isn't a souvenir, that somewhere, someone prayed over her, wrapped her in those linens with care, believing she would be safe. Eternal. And here we are. The streets are quieter now. Less traffic, fewer voices, more shadows. It's the hour when even the city exhales. The fog thickens again, and the gaslights seem to flicker slower, almost like they're hesitating. You're walking without thinking, letting your boots guide you, and soon you realise exactly where you've ended up. Limehouse, dockside. And the smell hits you before anything else. A curling, heavy mix of brine, fish, oil, and something sweet and smoky. Not unpleasant exactly, but thick, deep, like it wants to settle into your clothes and never leave. You've been here before, not often, not long. This corner of London carries a different rhythm than the rest, a quieter, deeper pulse, one that doesn't care for the Queen's English or Westminster rules. It's where sailors go to disappear, where lanterns burn low behind boarded windows, and where, tucked into narrow back alleys and behind doors painted in fading reds and greens, lie the opium dens. It's not hard to find one. You follow the scent and the silence, past shuttered warehouses, past men hunched over crates playing cards in the shadows. You push through a warped wooden door into a dim room that feels instantly warmer, softer, hazier, like walking into a velvet-lined cloud. The floor creaks underfoot, but no one looks up. They're too far gone. Inside, it's a nest of bodies draped over couches, cushions and mats. Some people are stretched out flat, limbs limp, expressions slack and far away. Others are perched like statues, glassy-eyed, pipes cradled in their fingers. A few are still talking, whispering nonsense or dreams. Someone laughs, softly, the kind of laugh that has nothing to do with jokes. The air is dense with the scent of burning opium, sweet, earthy, oddly soothing. Candles flicker low. There's no music, just breathing. You take a seat on a cushion, not far from an old man with his eyes rolled half shut and a pipe balanced perfectly between his lips. He exhales slowly, like each breath is a story that takes its time. This isn't your first time here, and you're not alone in that. Because while the respectable parts of London pretend not to notice, the truth is opium seeps through every class. Poor labourers use it to sleep through hunger. Artists claim it unlocks their minds. Wealthy women take it for nerves. It's prescribed, sold, smoked, swallowed and sprinkled on everything from cough syrup to teething powder. And if it numbs the edges of the world a little, all the better. Here's your historical fact. Victorian England was saturated with opium. It was legal, cheap and wildly popular. You could buy it at the chemist in the form of laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, or get it in tonics like Godfrey's Cordial or Mother's Friend, all helpfully dosed to quiet babies and overworked housewives alike. By mid-century, it's estimated that over a third of the population was using opiates regularly in some form. Not all were addicts, but many were. You lie back just a little, letting the haze creep in. You don't smoke this time, you just observe. A man next to you mutters something in Chinese, smiling faintly. Another scratches absently at his arm. You see a woman sitting perfectly still, upright, staring at nothing, her hair braided in a long heavy rope down her back. Her eyes shine, not like she's awake, more like she's elsewhere. This is the dream space, that's what they call it. The place opium takes you, and if you're lucky, it's beautiful. You float, you forget. You imagine warm rooms and soft hands and a city that doesn't hate you. You forget your debts, your blisters, your dead. You sink. Of course, if you're not lucky, the dream turns on you. You've heard stories. Sailors waking up convinced their skin was made of glass. Writers who saw shadowy figures crouched on their chests, whispering secrets too terrible to repeat. You once met a man who hadn't spoken since his last trip through the dream space, just sat rocking in place, mouthing the word again. And here's your fringe fact. Thomas de Quincey, the granddaddy of drug memoirs, published Confessions of an English Opium Eater in 1821, which practically glamorized addiction for an entire generation. He wrote about opium like it was poetry distilled, vivid, flowing, full of celestial cities and cosmic dreams. He left out, at first, the vomiting, the hallucinations, the weeks spent crawling across the floor searching for stray doses. That came later, in a revised edition. By then, it was too late. Everyone wanted to try it. Artists, poets, housemaids. It didn't matter. Misery is democratic. There's a scholarly debate about these dens, whether they were truly dens of sin or simply quiet refuges, exaggerated by panicked newspaper editors and moralists. Some historians insist the dens were overhyped, their dangers sensationalized by racist narratives targeting the Chinese community. Others point to hospital records, diaries and death certificates as proof that addiction was very real and very destructive. The truth, as usual, is complicated. But the feeling in here, thick, heavy, ancient, is not. You watch the pipe pass from hand to hand. No one speaks unless they have to. Time doesn't exist in here. Just the slow spiral of the smoke, the whisper of breath, and the feeling that somewhere outside this room, the world is still turning, and no one cares whether you're on it or not. Eventually you stand, your legs feel soft, your brain fogged, but clear enough to know it's time to leave. The air outside hits you hard, cold, sharp, almost rude. You cough once, twice, your throat's dry. But the fog is thinner now, and the stars, what few you can see, are still there. You start walking, and you think of the people still in there. How many will wake up, how many won't, how many will come back tomorrow and the next day and every day after that, chasing a quiet that doesn't last. You get it. You really do. But for now, you've got things to do. Misery can wait. Your stomach growls so loud it might qualify as a cry for help. Whatever fog had been numbing your senses burns off instantly when hunger decides it's time to remind you who's in charge. You haven't eaten since... well, you're not entirely sure. The tea helped earlier, but liquid comfort doesn't last long. You need something solid, something vaguely food-shaped, or at least warm. You start moving with purpose now, winding back through the alleys where the scent of damp brick gives way to sharper, more aggressive smells. Grease, onions, the occasional sizzle of meat that might not be meat, and a distinct yeasty haze that always signals someone's boiling something best left undefined. It's dinner hour in the slums. Not that anyone here's sitting down to linen napkins and roast. No, this is survival cuisine. You pass stalls and carts and windows with holes just big enough to slide a bowl through. A woman with soot on her cheeks is selling boiled potatoes. Another is stirring something thick and brown in a blackened pot, shouting, "Hot gruel! Halfpenny a bowl!" A group of children gathers around a man selling meat pies the size of thumbprints, suspiciously cheap and suspiciously pink. You decide to try your luck at a canteen tucked beneath a factory loading bay. It doesn't have a sign. It doesn't need one. The smell, fermented cabbage, burnt lard, and wet wool, says it all. Inside, rows of tired people sit hunched over tin bowls, the room steaming like a laundry shed in hell. You queue up, hand over a grubby coin, and receive your reward, a ladle of what might generously be called stew. It's greyish, thick, and smells faintly of onions and regret. You find a seat between two dock workers who don't look up. One's missing a thumb, the other is chewing something that might be bread or might be the spoon. You dip in. It's not the worst thing you've eaten, it's just hauntingly bland, and chewy in places that shouldn't be. There's a lump of what might be meat, but it doesn't have the decency to taste like any animal you know. You keep chewing. Better not to ask. Here's your historical fact. Gruel and meat glue were real staples of the poor Victorian diet. Gruel, a thin, watery porridge made from oats or cornmeal, was served in workhouses, prisons, and to the sick. It wasn't designed for taste. It was designed to keep people just barely alive. And meat glue, that was exactly what it sounds like. Offcuts and scraps boiled down into a gelatinous paste, reformed into loaf-like shapes, and sliced as if it were real meat. Sometimes it had bits of bone or gristle still inside. Bonus texture. And if you couldn't afford even that, well, there were always street foods, faggots, a kind of meatball made from heart, liver and lungs, eel pies, cow heel soup, boiled sheep's heads, and savoy sausages so red they looked like they'd been pulled from a fire. If you were lucky, you got the last slice of a day-old pudding stuffed with beef drippings. If you were unlucky, you got food poisoning, or worms. You scrape your bowl, not because you're still hungry, though you are, but because you paid for it, and you're not leaving a single congealed mystery behind. Here's your fringe fact for this meal. There was once a dish called mock turtle soup, made with a calf's head to mimic the texture of actual turtle flesh, because turtles were expensive and also, well, turtles. The dish became so popular among the middle classes trying to pretend they were rich that it appeared on menus for decades. If you see it served at a banquet in a Victorian novel, just know, someone boiled a cow's face for that. You finish the last bite and look around. A few others nodding off in their chairs, spoon still in hand. One man mutters to himself between bites. A child nearby is eating something that looks like it used to be bread but now resembles a sponge soaked in gravy. A woman at the next table sprinkles salt into her tea, shakes her head and mutters, "Need something real." You nod in silent agreement. There's a debate among modern scholars about whether the Victorian poor were truly malnourished or just underfed. Some argue that the sheer number of workhouses and soup kitchens provided enough calories to prevent starvation. Others say those calories came with a price: no nutrition, no variety, and long-term health problems like rickets, scurvy, and tooth loss. Either way, food wasn't about pleasure. It was a strategy. Eat what you can, when you can, and pray it stays down. You step back outside, belly only half full, but better than before. The cold hits harder now that you're warm inside. That cruel contrast. You pass a group of kids chewing raw turnips like they're candy. You spot a man squatting beside a fire, roasting something on a stick. You don't look too closely. The richer parts of town are probably feasting right now. Roasted pheasant, beef dripping with gravy, currant tarts, tea cakes, jellies that wobble like a promise. But not here. Here, you chew fast and keep moving. Too long in one place and someone might ask for your bowl, or your coat, or your life. You head toward the edge of the market where the smells shift again. This time to fish, smoked, stewed, and frying in old fat. There's a stall selling eels by the inch, another offering something called sea pie, which appears to contain neither sea nor pie. You keep walking, too rich for your blood. And honestly, you've had enough meat glue for one evening. As you duck into an alley, wiping your mouth with your sleeve, you think, food is the one thing that binds everyone together in this city. Hunger doesn't care if you're a chimney sweep or a lady in mourning. Everyone's looking for something to fill the emptiness. Bread, gin, opium, companionship. Even hope in small digestible doses. You're not full, not really, but your legs feel steadier now, your head clearer, and tomorrow, if you're lucky, there'll be another bowl, another coin, another chance to chew something real, or chew something close enough. You make your way back toward the river, the streets thinning out as midnight drips into the gutters. Most shop fronts are shuttered now, their windows dark, though a few gas lamps still burn behind dusty curtains, glowing like tired eyes. The wind picks up, carrying with it the wet stink of the Thames and something else, something colder, a little metallic. You're not sure where your feet are taking you until you turn the corner and see the sign, Wadsworth's portraiture and cabinet cards. A red lamp glows faintly above the door, which is cracked open just enough to invite the curious, or the desperate. You've heard about this place, everyone has. It's not your usual photographer. Wadsworth doesn't just do formal family portraits or vanity shots for rich ladies in tight corsets and tighter smiles. No, this is where you go when you want something more, something strange, something that doesn't always stay inside the frame. You push the door open. The bell above it gives a soft, reluctant jingle, like even it isn't sure this is a good idea. Inside, the air smells like varnish, candle wax, and whatever chemical they use to fix images to glass. Wadsworth himself emerges from the back, a tall skeletal man with a beard like smoke and fingers stained black from developer fluid. He gives you a once-over, expression unreadable, then gestures to the chair in the middle of the room. You take a seat. The cushion wheezes under you. Behind the chair is a black velvet curtain, and before you is a massive tripod-mounted camera that looks more like an engine than an artistic tool. He adjusts the lens with care, hands steady, silent. You don't ask for a particular pose. You don't have to. Wadsworth knows what people come here for, and what you've come for is a spirit photograph. Here's your historical fact. Spirit photography emerged in the mid-19th century, right in the thick of the Victorian obsession with death and the supernatural. A man named William Mumler in the United States first claimed to capture ghosts on film, usually faint white shapes or figures hovering behind the living. His most famous image showed Mary Todd Lincoln with the ghost of her assassinated husband, Abraham, standing behind her, hands gently on her shoulders. The photograph went viral by 19th century standards, and the trend caught fire. Soon, everyone wanted proof that their dearly departed was still close. Wadsworth adjusts the lens again, then moves to the side, lighting a few candles and muttering instructions about stillness and breath. The room is quiet except for the tick of his pocket watch and the occasional creak of floorboards settling. Then he slips into the shadows. You hear the click of the shutter, the long pause of exposure. You try not to blink. And in that moment, brief, silent, eternal, you feel it. A brush of cold air against your neck, a weight on your shoulder. You don't turn around, you know better. Whether it's real or just your nerves, you don't want to see. Not yet. Wadsworth reappears, expression unchanged, and disappears again into the darkroom with your plate. The smell of chemicals grows stronger. You hear the clink of glass, the rush of water, the hiss of vapour. While you wait, you glance around. The walls are lined with examples of his work. Photographs of pale women with faint faces floating beside them, men with shadowy hands resting on their shoulders, children cradling ghostly siblings who died in infancy. Some of the spirits are subtle, just a blur, a foggy shape. Others are more assertive. You spot one where a woman's face appears twice, once in her own body and again behind her, mouth open as if mid-scream. You're not sure what to feel. Skeptical? Intrigued? Terrified? Wadsworth never claims to summon the dead. He doesn't make promises. He just takes the photograph. What shows up is up to the image. Here's your fringe fact. There was a short-lived trend for headless portraits in the late Victorian era. Not ghost photos, just people posing to look like they'd been decapitated. Often, it was done with trick photography. A man would appear to hold his own head in his lap, or a woman's head would be placed on a serving tray. It was grotesque, theatrical, and weirdly popular. Some say it was just dark humour. Others say it was a playful way of mocking death, of pretending, if only for a moment, that the body didn't matter. That death could be staged. You wonder if Wadsworth ever did those. Probably. He seems like the type. He returns now, holding the still wet glass plate between two cloth-wrapped fingers. He doesn't speak as he hands it to you, and you don't speak as you take it. The image is murky, the edges still fogged. You see yourself sitting stiff in the chair, eyes slightly widened, and behind you, something pale. Not a face, not quite, just the suggestion of one. A distortion in the curtain, a shape that looks almost like a shoulder, a jawline, a hand. You blink. Could be a trick of light. Could be your imagination. Or it could be them, someone you didn't even know you'd lost. Wadsworth doesn't ask if you're satisfied. He doesn't need to. You leave a coin on the table, more than you can afford, and step outside, the air cooler now, the wind carrying a whisper through the trees. There's debate, of course, always debate. Some say spirit photography was just clever double exposures and chemical smears. Others insist the ghosts were real, that the lens can capture what the eye can't. Even now, scholars and skeptics argue in dusty journals and late-night forums, but the photograph is in your pocket, and the feeling is still in your bones. You don't look back at the shop, you just walk. And every so often, as you pass a window, you glance at your reflection, not to check your hair, not to adjust your collar, but to see if someone else is standing behind you. By now, the city has rolled onto its side like an overfed cat, still breathing, still twitching here and there, but mostly asleep, or pretending to be. The pubs are emptying out. The shopkeepers have long since bolted their doors. Even the chimneys have stopped puffing for the night. You, on the other hand, are still moving, still picking your way through this long, strange walk that feels less like a stroll and more like archaeology through the living past. Your next stop isn't marked on any map. You just know it when you see it. A battered brick building with peeling paint, no sign out front, and a window just high enough that no one can peek in. You knock once, twice, then 3 times in quick succession. A slot opens at eye level. A woman's voice, dry as old paper, asks, "You got a pass?" You don't. But you flash the photograph from Wadsworth's studio and say, "He sent me." It's not a lie exactly, more like spiritual credit. There's a pause, then the sound of a bolt sliding back. You're inside before you can change your mind. The air smells of ink and sweat and damp wool. It's a club, a secret one. Not for gambling or pleasure or politics. This one's for the Society of the Resurrected Past, a gaggle of amateur historians, rogue scholars, and soft-spoken eccentrics who've made it their mission to document the strange, shadowy details of Victorian life most people would rather forget. The things that aren't written down in textbooks, the moments hiding between headlines, the weird stuff. And tonight, they're talking about post-mortem etiquette. You slip into a seat near the back as the current speaker, a woman in a high-button coat and round spectacles, stands before a table filled with photographs, bone samples, and what appears to be a child's mourning dress. She holds up a small yellowing card. "This," she says, "is a funeral invite. It was sent not by mail but by hand, delivered directly to the door. You didn't ask to go to a funeral, you were summoned." The audience nods solemnly. She continues describing the expectations. Black gloves, handkerchiefs with lace edging, crepe bands around sleeves, black-edged calling cards. Funerals weren't private. They were staged, orchestrated, scored like plays. Mourning was not an emotional process. It was a performance. And if you wept too loud or wore your hat wrong, people noticed. People talked. Here's your historical fact. Victorian funerals were elaborate affairs, even for the working class. Coffins were often rented unless you could afford to buy your own. Horses were draped in black with plumes attached to their heads. Mourners were hired to cry. Children were dressed in white, symbolizing innocence, while adults wore the heaviest black they could afford. And mourning jewellery, still going strong, often made from jet or containing tiny woven braids of the deceased's hair. The more sentimental, the better. She passes around a tiny glass brooch. You peer in when it reaches you. Yep, definitely human hair, arranged into a delicate little swirl beneath the dome. It's beautiful in a macabre, meticulous kind of way. You hand it off and wonder how many people wore parts of their loved ones like that. Necklaces made from grief, worn close to the throat. Another speaker rises now, this one clutching a stack of photographs. You immediately recognise the eerie aesthetic. Stiff poses, pale faces, oddly serene expressions, post-mortem portraits, photographs of the dead, but not lying in coffins. No, these are posed like they're still alive. A man seated beside a sleeping brother, a child with its eyes painted onto closed lids, a young woman standing supported by a hidden frame, staring just past the camera. To a modern eye, it's chilling, but to the Victorians, it was a last chance, a way to preserve the face of someone you loved, maybe the only image you'd ever have. Here's your fringe fact. Some photographers specialised in post-mortem portraits and were in such high demand that they carried folding backdrops, arm braces, and special tools to manipulate the body into lifelike poses. Sometimes family members would hold the body upright in group photos, smiling gently while trying not to tremble. They called them memento mori, reminders of death, not to frighten, but to remember, to honour. There's debate now, as always, about whether these photos were acts of love or a kind of denial. Some scholars argue that they reflect a culture unable to let go, desperate to hold on to physical traces. Others believe it was simply practical. Portraits were expensive and death was sudden. You took the picture when you could, living or not. You shift in your seat as the speaker dims the lantern slightly, setting a more intimate tone. The room flickers, the photographs on the table catching the light like ghost stories caught mid-whisper. She brings out her final item, a mourning doll. It's small, about the size of a loaf of bread, dressed in black satin with delicate glass eyes. This, she says softly, was made after the death of a little girl named Beatrice. The doll has real hair, probably the child's own, and its face is painted to resemble her. These weren't toys, they were keepsakes, sometimes even buried with the parents if the child died young. You can feel the silence thickening in the room, not out of fear, but respect. Grief here is not hidden, it's displayed, shared, preserved in wax, hair, ink, and fabric. The dead don't just go in Victorian London, they linger, on mantelpieces, in lockets, in photographs tucked into drawers that no one ever opens, but no one can throw away either. Someone clears their throat, another sips from a flask. There's no clapping when the presentation ends, just thoughtful nods and a few murmurs of thanks. You stay seated a moment longer, letting the room settle around you. Because here's the thing. For all their rules and rituals, the Victorians weren't afraid of death. Not the way we are. They made room for it, talked to it, dressed for it, held it in their hands. It wasn't a thing to be hidden away or euphemized into oblivion. It was normal, expected, shared. You step back into the street, the door creaking shut behind you. The red lamp goes dark. You walk on, slower now, not out of exhaustion but something deeper. Reflection maybe. Respect. You think about the photographs, the doll, the hair in the brooch, all those quiet, strange ways people tried to hold on. And you wonder, not for the first time, who will hold on to you? The wind kicks up around your collar as you drift deeper into the city's veins, past shuttered shops and locked garden gates, past terraces where even the cats have gone to bed. London hums low now, like a clock left winding down, and you follow that hum straight toward the river again. The Thames is never asleep. It turns in its muddy bed like some great black animal, restless and thick with old stories. You pause at the edge of one of the docks, watching the dark current move under the ghost glow of the moon. You're not alone. There, just a few steps off, sits a woman on the edge of the dock, legs dangling over the water like she's waiting for a ferry that will never come. She doesn't notice you at first. Her bonnet is tipped back slightly, and her dress is too clean for this side of the river, too pressed. You know that look. She's not from here. And yet she is. You watch her for a long minute, then you quietly take a spot nearby. Not close enough to disturb her, just near enough to understand. Because you've heard the whispers. You know what this part of the river is known for. And you've seen the signs. The black ribbon tied to the rail, the bouquet of cheap flowers tucked into the iron, the worn spot where the stone has lost its edge from too many feet, hesitating before that final step. She finally glances your way. Her eyes are dry, but heavy, like she's been carrying too much for too long, and only just realised she could put it down. You say nothing. That's the rule here. This is Suicide Dock. Here's your historical fact. In the Victorian era, suicide was still considered both a sin and a crime. It was literally illegal. If you tried and failed, you could be arrested, fined, even imprisoned. If you succeeded, your family might be punished instead, shamed, fined, and barred from burying you in consecrated ground. In some cases, your body could be buried at a crossroads with a stake driven through the chest, a barbaric tradition meant to stop your restless soul from wandering. And yet, the city was full of ghosts. Every week the Thames gave up bodies, washed in from the bridges, the docks, the banks. Most were unnamed. Some were just girls in lace-up boots. Others were men with pockets weighted down with bricks. A few were whole families, undone by poverty, cold, or despair that bloomed like rot in their bones. Not all of them left notes. But when they did, the messages were often simple. I'm sorry. I couldn't keep up. Please feed the cat. There's a fringe fact you probably haven't heard. In the 1850s, a woman named Sarah Ann Henley threw herself from the Clifton Suspension Bridge in a fit of despair after a broken engagement, but survived. Her skirt, massive with crinoline, caught the air like a parachute and slowed her fall. She lived to be 85, Victorian fashion, occasionally deadly, occasionally life-saving. The woman beside you sighs. It's quiet, but it says more than a paragraph ever could. You still don't speak. That's not what this moment needs. Just presence. And here's the complicated part, the debate that still threads through history books and charity archives. Some scholars argue that Victorian society caused these deaths more than any single moment of despair. The crushing pressure of morality, the isolation, the lack of mental health support. Others say that economic instability was the real culprit. Unemployment, hunger, no safety nets. The truth, as always, refuses to pick sides. It's all of it. The quiet chokehold of survival in a world where breaking down was something you had to do privately, silently, behind drawn curtains, or not at all. You spot something bobbing against the dock. Just a piece of wood, probably, but for a heartbeat your stomach lurches. You've seen worse. The city doesn't clean itself. It just swallows and swallows and swallows. The woman stands, brushing her skirt off with long, deliberate strokes. Her shoulders square just a bit. She doesn't thank you, but she nods, a small, tired gesture. And then she walks away, slowly but steadily. Her boots click softly against the dock until the sound is swallowed by the wind. You stay behind a moment longer, looking out at the water, its dark back rising and falling like a sleeper in a troubled dream. Maybe the dock saved her tonight. Maybe you did. Maybe it was just time. You turn and walk, this time along the water's edge where gas lamps reflect in long trembling ribbons across the surface. The river doesn't judge, it just carries. At the next bridge, someone has scrawled something in chalk across the stone railing. The words are crooked, half washed away, but still legible. We lived through this. You can too. You pause, then you keep walking. Because if there's one truth you've learned in this city, it's that survival isn't about strength or virtue or worthiness. It's about persistence, grit, luck, stubbornness, and the occasional hand on your shoulder, even if it's invisible. You pass a constable who's leaning on a lamppost, eyes closed, pretending not to hear the city moan around him. You pass a man selling roasted chestnuts, the heat from his cart chasing the chill from your face. You pass a boy sleeping under a makeshift tent of newspapers. The river keeps moving, so do you. By now your boots are soaked. Your coat hem is heavy with grime, and your fingers have forgotten what warmth feels like. But you keep moving, because stopping means thinking too hard about everything you've seen tonight. Fires, ghosts, velvet-draped corpses, soup that might have once been a shoe, and a woman who almost disappeared into the river. It's a lot. But Victorian London never gives you just a lot. It gives you too much. Always. The streets begin to narrow again, and the lamps grow farther apart, casting longer shadows. You find yourself slipping into Whitechapel, a part of town where the houses lean inward like gossips, and the cobblestones have teeth. The smell hits next. Faint blood, sour beer, coal smoke, and something sharp and coppery that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. This is the part of the city that feels coiled, like it's waiting, and for good reason. Because this was Jack the Ripper's hunting ground. You don't need to say the name out loud, everyone knows it. Even now, over a century later, the name echoes like a curse in the fog. Jack, the Ripper, the man, or myth, who turned murder into spectacle and Whitechapel into a stage. The killings began in 1888, but the fear has never fully left. It lives in these alleys like mildew in wallpaper. You turn a corner onto a street that looks like every other, and yet it's not. You know this one. Bucks Row. You've read the reports. You've seen the grainy sketches, the way the newspapers circle the details like vultures around a fresh kill. This is where Mary Ann Nichols was found, throat slashed, skirt lifted. Just 30 minutes earlier, a constable had walked past the same spot and seen nothing. It doesn't get closer than that. Here's your historical fact. Between August and November of 1888, 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were brutally murdered in Whitechapel. Their throats were cut, their bodies mutilated. The last was so violently butchered that the inspector who found her never spoke of it again. The killer was never caught. Letters signed Jack the Ripper taunted the police and the press, some stained with blood. Whether those letters were real or hoaxes is still debated, but the name stuck, and so did the fear. You keep walking, slower now, because the air feels different here. Not just heavy, but watched. You know it's irrational. The Ripper is long gone, dead, dust, legend. But the mind doesn't care. The mind remembers. And you're not alone in this unease. At every street corner there's a blue plaque, a worn-out sign, or a ghost tour leaflet flapping in the breeze. The murders have become currency, twisted into tourism, turned into stories for entertainment. People walk these alleys with pint glasses in hand, giggling nervously as guides describe organs missing and blood running in gutters. The horror commodified. But here's the fringe fact. Not all the Ripper's supposed victims were his. Some experts argue that only 3 of the 5 canonical murders fit the same pattern. Others believe the number is higher, perhaps over 10. Some even suggest the killer was never a single man at all, but a series of unrelated murders blamed on one shadow to make the world feel more orderly. Scarier, yes, but at least explainable. You reach Miller's Court, or what's left of it. The building where Mary Jane Kelly was found is long gone, replaced by a drab block of flats and a parking lot that tries very hard to pretend it wasn't once soaked in screams. People walk past it every day, dragging their shopping or their kids, not knowing or not caring what happened on this very soil. Or maybe they do know, but what can you do? History doesn't ask for permission to keep breathing. You pause near a wall that's still stained, not with blood, but with time. Someone scrawled the names of the 5 victims there. Just first names, like friends, Mary, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary Jane. It's easy to forget they were real. The press didn't help. They called them prostitutes, drunks, vagrants. Disposable. They were mocked in political cartoons, dissected by armchair detectives, and written about like puzzle pieces, not people. But each one had a life, a favourite meal, a laugh, a story no one bothered to ask about until it ended in a headline. Here's the debate that still rages in books, forums, and overly enthusiastic documentaries. Was the Ripper sensationalised to the point of becoming fiction? Was he even the story? Or were the women, his victims, the real narrative, ignored in favour of shadowy theories and blurry photos? Some historians argue the public fascination says more about us than about him. That our obsession isn't about justice or closure. It's about fear, control, the thrill of darkness, safe at a distance. You start walking again, and your steps echo a little louder now, or maybe the streets just got emptier. You glance over your shoulder instinctively. Just a trick of the gaslight. Just a curtain fluttering in a window. Still, you walk faster, because whether or not he's real anymore, the Ripper has carved his shape into these stones. The city remembers, and so do you. And maybe, just maybe, this whole place is built on the stories we don't finish. The footsteps you don't hear until they're too close. The women no one believed until they stopped breathing. The names turned into trivia. And you, still here, still walking, still haunted by a man you'll never see. You keep walking, not because you know where you're going, but because stopping in Whitechapel after midnight just feels like a bad idea. Every brick here carries too many stories. You can almost hear them breathing through the fog. But slowly the streets begin to widen again, and the narrow-eyed buildings relax their shoulders. The air is still cold, still soaked with soot and echo, but there's a little more room to think. A little less shadow pressing in at the corners. And then, as you pass under a low iron archway, you hear it. Soft at first, like someone whispering through a fan. Then louder, rhythmic, metallic. Chick, chick, chick. You round the corner, and there it is. An alley glowing with furnace-orange light and the unmistakable sound of machines. You've stumbled across one of the many factories that never sleeps. This one's a textile mill, judging by the lint in the air and the fabric scraps clinging to the workers' clothes. The clatter of looms and clunk of flywheels is nearly hypnotic, relentless like a heartbeat that's lost its rhythm. Through the high, smudged windows, you see silhouettes moving, slow, tired, jerky. Figures hunched over tables, heads bowed, not in prayer, but in resignation. And somehow, someone is still singing. Just a soft, raspy tune. A work song, maybe, or a lullaby for the damned. Either way you stop and watch. This is the engine room of the Victorian world, the real one. Forget the parlours, the corsets, the ghost photograph seances. This is what keeps London's lungs pumping. Steam, gears, sweat, and the backs of workers who don't get to call themselves ladies or gentlemen. The ones who didn't get a cameo brooch or a penny dreadful or a spot in the obituary unless they died spectacularly. Everyone else just disappears behind the smoke. You peer in closer and see the truth of it. Rows of women, some no older than 14, working the spinning machines with bloodied fingers wrapped in rags. A boy stumbles near a belt drive and is yanked back by a girl who doesn't even pause in her stitching. One of the overseers patrols the aisle, stick in hand, tapping it against his palm like he's daring someone to rest their eyes too long. Here's your historical fact. During the height of the Industrial Revolution, London's factories were powered almost entirely by human labour. Children, women, and the poor. 10-hour days were considered humane. 14-hour shifts were standard. Wages were pitiful. Safety regulations were laughable. And yet the economy boomed. Textiles, steel, coal, gas. The engines of empire ran on backs bent double before they hit 20. You edge closer to the door and peer through the cracked glass. Inside, everything is coated in a layer of fuzz, fibres floating in the air like snow. Beautiful if you squint, deadly if you breathe too deep. Byssinosis, they called it. Brown lung. The soft, slow rot of your insides from years of inhaling cotton dust. But the mills didn't shut down. They just swapped out workers when one wore out. That soft singing continues. A girl in the back, her face drawn, her hair tied in a filthy ribbon. She hums like it's the only thing keeping her from dissolving. No one tells her to stop. Maybe they need it too. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorian factory workers, especially in matchstick factories, suffered from a condition called phossy jaw, a horrifying side effect of exposure to white phosphorus, which caused the jawbone to rot, glow faintly in the dark and sometimes explode. Literally. You could light a cigarette off your own necrosis. The women working with phosphorus were called match girls, and many kept working until their faces caved in. They had to. Rent was due. The factory doors creak open suddenly and a few workers spill out into the alley for air, or what passes for it in London. They light cigarettes with shaky hands, their shoulders slumped like sacks of coal. You stay still in the shadows, just another shape among many. One of them coughs wetly and spits into the gutter. Another pulls a flask from her apron and takes a long swig before tucking it back. You recognise that look. Not rebellion, not even endurance, just momentum. There's a scholarly debate over whether the industrial age was a net benefit or a moral horror. Some point to increased productivity, innovation, and progress. Others point to the human cost, maimed children, broken spines, cities choked with smoke and sorrow. One side writes the history books, the other just gets buried under them. The bell rings from inside the mill, a short, sharp clang. The workers stub out their cigarettes and drift back in, silent as ghosts returning to their haunt. The alley is quiet again. You walk on. As you turn the corner, you spot something odd nailed to a lamppost. A flyer, handwritten, hastily printed with a smudged press. It reads, "Meeting of the Sisters of the Sweatshop demand better pay, demand shorter hours. We are not machines." Below it, someone scribbled in pencil, "We're not ghosts either." You stare at it for a moment, unsure whether to feel hope or dread. Maybe both, because this city has always been powered by people no one wants to look at directly. The girls in corsets working looms instead of ballroom floors, the boys who don't grow old enough to be men, the mothers who work nights and bury their coughing babies in the morning. They built London's wealth, they paid in pieces of themselves, and tonight their song still echoes, quiet, tired, refusing to be forgotten. The deeper into the night you go, the more the city begins to feel like a stage set between performances, lights dimmed, props left askew, the actors off changing into someone else. There's an eerie calm that settles over London in this hour. Not peace, not safety, just stillness, like the city's holding its breath. You walk past rows of sleeping houses, their windows black, their curtains closed like lids over tired eyes. And yet, even now, there are places in London that never sleep. Places where the lights never go out, not because someone forgot, but because someone refuses. You find one of them in a narrow side street near Holborn, behind a crooked fence and a rusted gate, where a crooked sign reads, "The Great Anatomical Museum, Curiosities of the Body and Soul." It sounds like a joke, but the lights are on, and your curiosity is awake and kicking. You step inside. The room is too warm, lit by smoky oil lamps that cast the glass cases in a yellow glow. The smell hits first, stale formaldehyde, aged leather, maybe something faintly sweet and wrong like old apples gone bad. The exhibits are packed into the narrow room with chaotic precision. Shelves of bones, preserved organs, anatomical models, wax figures posed mid-dissection. If a library and a butcher's shop had a child, it would look like this. There's a man at the desk near the door wearing a vest that may once have been red. He doesn't greet you, just nods toward the ticket tin. You drop in a coin, and he slides a pamphlet your way. Mind, Matter, and Mortality, a self-guided tour. You start walking, not quite sure what you're walking into. To your left, a human skeleton dangles from a wire, grinning like it knows things you don't. Beside it, a glass jar holds a human heart, grey and shriveled, as if trying to disappear into itself. Further down, there's a collection of preserved hands, each labelled thief, scribe, midwife, infant. The infant one is no larger than a plum. Here's your historical fact. Victorian London had a deep, persistent obsession with the body, how it worked, how it failed, and what could be learned from its failures. Medical museums cropped up all over the city, often run by private collectors or eccentric physicians. Some were educational, others were pure spectacle. You could pay a penny to look at syphilitic skulls, malformed spines, or fetal anomalies preserved in jars. Morbid, absolutely, but also popular. These weren't hidden away, they were advertised. You drift toward a section labelled Craniometry and Character. Skulls lined neatly in rows, each marked with measurements and short bios. A wax plaque explains that Victorians believed head shape determined personality and intelligence. High foreheads, intellectual, flattened crowns, criminal, overgrown occipital lobes, deviant. Science, they said. Real, serious science. Except it wasn't. Or at least it was science with a heavy dose of racism, classism, and Victorian superiority. Poor people's skulls were measured to prove why they were poor. Non-white skulls were displayed to justify empire, and all of it was recorded with the cold efficiency of a library catalogue. This wasn't anatomy. This was ideology in bone. Your feet take you to the next room, where the walls are lined with wax models of human bodies in various states of dissection. Skin peeled back, muscles exposed like raw rope, organs neatly arranged, labelled with brass tags like items on a menu. It's grotesque, and strangely beautiful. The detail is so precise it hurts to look. The veins, the sinews, the little tendons in the fingers. Someone spent weeks making these. Probably more. And here's your fringe fact. One of the most famous anatomical wax artists of the era was a woman, Anna Morandi Manzolini. Though not a Victorian herself, her influence lingered into the 19th century, and her lifelike wax models were so accurate that doctors used them to study when cadavers were scarce. Her own husband had been a professor of anatomy. When he died, she took over his position and kept teaching, slicing, moulding, recording. She even modelled her own organs. Talk about dedication. You find a glass case labelled Curious Cases, and oh yes, it delivers. There's a mummified foot with 6 toes, a cast of conjoined twins, a jar containing a human eye, still startlingly intact, staring at nothing. One case holds the preserved stomach of a man who reportedly died after swallowing 40 coins in a gambling stunt. You can still see the tarnished outlines. In another jar, a pair of lungs blackened by coal dust labelled Age 23, Cause of Death, Chimney Sweeping. You have to look away, and then comes the debate. The part of the tour with no answers. A sign on the wall, newer than the rest, reads, "Is this respect?" Below it are questions, not facts. Do we learn from the dead or exploit them? Is this remembrance or entertainment? Does knowing how a heart works help us understand how it feels? Someone has scrawled a reply beneath it in ink. Knowledge is the least we owe the dead. Below that, someone else wrote, but not at the cost of their dignity. You don't add your thoughts, you just keep moving. Because here's the truth that lingers in the corners of this place. The Victorians were both obsessed with the physical body and terrified of what it meant to inhabit one. Bodies betrayed you. They bled, broke, and decayed. They carried scandal and shame. But they were also the gateway to knowledge, to progress, to control. If you could understand the body, maybe, just maybe, you could conquer death, or at least delay it. You exit the museum with the weight of bone still heavy in your mind. The night air slaps your face like it missed you. You take a deep breath, cold, coal-scented, and it feels strange to be inside a body again after seeing so many taken apart. But you are, and your heart is still beating, and your skin, flawed and all, is still your own. The museum door closes behind you with a soft click. You walk on, still intact, for now. The final stretch of the night wraps around you like a tired old coat, frayed at the cuffs, damp at the hem, but strangely comforting. London has grown quieter still, if that's possible. The gas lamps are down to their last sputters, and even the rats seem to be resting. You pass familiar sights now made unfamiliar by darkness. A bakery shuttered tight, the smell of flour long gone. A statue of Queen Victoria in the square, her marble face streaked with soot and pigeon markings, looking less like a monarch and more like a witness to something unspeakable. And speaking of witnesses, there's one last place you feel drawn to, as if the city itself is nudging you toward it with a bony finger. You follow a narrow path between buildings, brick pressing in close, until you come upon a squat structure made of stone and iron. The windows are barred. The air is colder here, thick with the scent of bleach, mildew, and something sour underneath. You found the morgue. Technically it's called the mortuary, but no one uses the formal name. Everyone just says the morgue, and everyone knows which one. This is where the city's dead come when no one else wants them. The ones pulled from the river, found in the alleys, dragged from fires, dropped in ditches. The nameless, the unloved, the inconvenient. A gas lamp flickers dimly over the doorway. There's no lock on the door, not really. A quiet push, and you're inside. The room is cooler than anywhere you've been tonight. No surprise there, it has to be. The dead prefer it cold. The walls are lined with marble slabs, many empty, a few occupied. The bodies are covered in grey linen respectfully, but not reverently. A single attendant sits at a desk in the corner, hunched over tea gone cold. He glances at you, then back to his newspaper. This isn't a tourist attraction. You're not here for a souvenir, and that's the only reason he lets you stay. You walk among the slabs slowly, quietly. Some have name tags, most don't. Just numbers. That's the part that hits hardest. How easily people become numbers once they stop breathing. Here's your historical fact. The Victorian morgue was often open to the public. Yes, really. It wasn't just a place for coroners and constables. Curious citizens could stroll in, peer at the dead, and try to identify them. It was considered a civic duty and a bit of morbid entertainment. Newspaper ads would announce unidentified bodies like theatre listings. Come see the drowned man in stall 2. Bring a handkerchief. You stop beside a slab where the cloth has slipped slightly, just enough to see a hand. It's bluish, swollen. One ring still clings to a finger. Plain, cheap, maybe a wedding band, maybe not. You try not to imagine the life it once held. You fail. There's a strange comfort in this place, as awful as that sounds. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the lack of pretense. Everyone here is equal now, pauper or banker, thief or priest. Death doesn't care about class, neither does the morgue. Here's your fringe fact. Some of the dead who passed through morgues like this were sold to medical schools, illegally, quietly, often without permission. While body snatching had mostly died down after the Anatomy Act of 1832, the demand for fresh cadavers never stopped. If a body went unclaimed long enough, it was sometimes repurposed for education or experimentation, or, in one particularly grim case, used in a demonstration on live dissection that drew a crowd larger than most weddings. And then, of course, there's the debate, there always is, about whether morgues were tools of compassion or just efficient containers for bureaucratic death. Some say they gave closure, a chance for loved ones to find the missing. Others argue they stripped humanity from the process, reducing grief to paperwork and display. A cold room where someone's mother or son was lined up like a roast in a butcher's case. You don't know the answer. You're just standing here, surrounded by silence and the faint hum of the gaslight. And then you notice something. Pinned to the wall beside the exit, a corkboard filled with notes. Bits of paper, some browned with age, others newer. They're not official notices. They're letters, messages, scribbled scraps that say things like, "To the man found with a silver locket, you're missed. We didn't know where to send the flowers, so we came here. You weren't forgotten, I just didn't know where to look." They break your heart a little, because that's the thing about this city. It pretends it's all soot and systems and stern old ladies clutching their purses. But beneath all that grime, there's still this persistent, stubborn pulse of humanity. People reaching for each other, even across the divide of death, even when they have no idea if their words will land. You leave the morgue and step back into the street just as dawn starts to gnaw at the edges of the horizon. The sky lightens in streaks of grey and bruised purple. Somewhere far off, a milk cart rattles by. A newspaper boy yawns into his scarf. The city is beginning again, whether it wants to or not. You pause on the bridge that crosses the Thames. The river is quieter now, its surface like hammered pewter. You take out the photo from Wadsworth's studio, hold it up against the dim morning light. That pale figure behind you, ghost or trick, still lingers, watching or waiting. And you think about all the people you met tonight. The rope sleepers, the tea sellers, the match girls, the mourning mothers, the dissected strangers, the factory hands, the woman who almost didn't walk away from the dock. They're all still here in some way, because London doesn't forget its ghosts. It just builds new houses on top of them. You take one last breath before the world tilts fully into day. It smells like ash and bread and something older underneath, something that doesn't wash away, and you know, without question, that you'll never see the city the same again. So that's it. You made it. You survived a full night in Victorian London, which, if we're being honest, is more than most of the people living there could say. You walked miles through soot and fog, stared down haunted doorways, tasted mystery meat disguised as stew, ducked into death museums and opium dens, and got uncomfortably close to a wax lung and a photograph of yourself with a possible ghost behind you. And if that doesn't earn you a hot cup of tea and a quiet lie down, I don't know what does. The city now, in your mind, probably feels like some impossible blend of Dickens and nightmares. A collage of factory smoke, flickering gaslight, pickpockets with sharp eyes, and horse dung steaming in alleyways. But it wasn't all grime. There were people too, real people, trying their best to survive, to feed their kids, to hang on to a scrap of dignity while the whole social machine tried to grind them into ash. People singing quietly in textile mills, leaving notes for the dead, whispering to each other over shared ropes in penny lodgings. And yes, it was absurd. Unhinged, even. There were gas-powered beauty masks, rotting meat sold as dinner, and an entire profession built around photographing corpses to comfort grieving families. But in its own twisted way, it all made sense. Every bizarre practice, every eerie tradition was just another way to answer the same old question. How do we live, and how do we die, in a world that doesn't always notice either? Tonight you've seen that even in the most brutal corners of history, people found ways to dream, to mourn, to keep going. And sometimes that meant sleeping upright on a rope. Sometimes it meant humming to yourself while your fingers bled thread. But now, your own night is ending. The room is quiet, the lights are low, and somewhere just beyond your window, your own city, whatever time, whatever place you're in, is beginning to stir. So go ahead, breathe deeply, let the hum of the past settle like dust. You don't need to understand everything. You were there, you felt it, and that's enough. Sleep well, traveller of time, you earned it.